Chun Yo-won was exposed despite his flawless disguise of face and voice. The leader immediately ordered the men behind him to subdue the spy and force him to kneel without delay. The command was acknowledged at once, and 3 men rushed forward, convinced that Yo-won was nothing more than an ordinary infiltrator they could easily capture to earn favor. That assumption shattered in the next instant. With a simple flick of his finger, Yo-won released a violent burst of compressed air. The pressure struck all 3 men simultaneously, hurling their bodies backward. They slammed into the floor with heavy thuds, cries of pain bursting from them as they bounced and collapsed. Yo-won had not moved from his spot, yet the 3 attackers lay sprawled across the ground, unable to rise. Their bodies twitched as though they had suffered grave internal injuries, leaving them helpless. The sight filled Yoon Baek and the surrounding men with undeniable embarrassment and shock. Groans slipped from them as disbelief spread through the ranks. They had assumed he was a harmless spy, and the realization of how wrong they were tightened their expressions as lips were bitten in frustration. The leader stared down at Yo-won, inwardly shaken, his thoughts racing as he questioned who this man truly was, and how someone like him had appeared here. At that moment, the Great Hallmaster's escort warrior stepped forward. The warrior launched himself from his position. He shot past Yo-won in a blur, slashing decisively as he passed. However, when he turned to confirm the strike, his eyes widened in shock as he realized he had only cut through an afterimage. The instant he looked forward again, he froze. Yo-won had already reappeared before him. Yo-won stared down at the escort warrior and remarked on the unusual nature of the sword he carried. Before the man could even register what was happening, Yo-won seized the weapon and slashed his hand. Blood burst from the wound as the warrior screamed in agony, the pain overwhelming him instantly. The leader cried out in desperation, demanding to know what his men were doing and ordering them to go after Yo-won at once. The command was enough to spur them into action. Without hesitation, the men drew the thin, curved, dagger-like blades from their waists and rushed forward. Yo-won remained unmoved. He calmly extended his palm toward the advancing attackers, dismissing them as foolish. In that moment, Yo-won's internal energy erupted outward. The force struck the men before they could even reach him, flinging them violently away. Their bodies slammed into the ground one after another, cries of pain bursting from them as they were forced down. Pinned to the floor, they were unable to move. An unseen power, something far beyond ordinary comprehension, crushed them against the ground. The sheer strength of it was evident from the cracks spreading across the warehouse floor beneath their bodies. Behind Yo-won, the escort warrior, who had fallen earlier, suddenly moved. Gathering force chi into his sword, he charged from the rear with killing intent, but before he could reach his target, Yo-won turned, his own force chi surging, and slashed through the warrior's arm before severing his neck in a single clean motion. The man's head spun through the air as blood sprayed outward in a crimson arc. The leader, shaken to his core by the sight, stumbled backward without realizing it. He barely managed to take a step before Yo-won lightly stretched out his left hand, mimicking the motion of pulling on an invisible thread. In an instant, the leader was dragged forward against his will, a strained cry forced from his throat. Yo-won's hand tightened around the man's neck, cutting off his breath. The leader's body trembled violently as fear consumed him. Yo-won glared at him coldly, questioning what he had meant earlier about a fool who was destined to die here. As Yo-won lifted the leader's head slightly, the robe concealing his face slipped away. His exposed appearance caught Yo-won's attention, revealing that the man was a eunuch. Yo-won examined him inwardly, judging that his martial arts stood around the supreme peak, yet his inner energy leaned closer to yin energy. He noted that the nature of this inner energy technique was far too different to belong to the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect. Yo-won questioned whether the man before him was truly a spy from the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect. The eunuch reacted with visible confusion, denying any connection to such a sect and expressing ignorance at the very mention of it. Observing his reaction, Yo-won realized inwardly that the man did not appear to be lying, and the possibility surfaced that he might have seized the wrong person. Yo-won then lowered his right hand as if pressing down on something unseen. In an instant, the tremendous pressure that had been suppressing all the spies inside the warehouse vanished like an illusion. Finding this situation abnormal, Yo-won shifted his gaze toward Yoon Baek. Having witnessed Yo-won's overwhelming power, Yoon Baek stood frozen, utterly unsure of how to respond. Yo-won reached out and dragged Yoon Baek toward him. Lacking both the will and the strength to resist such a dominant opponent, Yoon Baek was pulled helplessly forward and forced down onto his knees with a heavy thud, a cry slipping from him as his body struck the floor. Yo-won demanded to know why the embroidered uniform guards were in contact with eunuchs from the Eastern Depot. Yoon Baek chose silence, offering no response. That silence persisted until Yo-won released his force chi once more. Yo-won found the situation almost amusing, remarking on the irony of someone intending to remain loyal even while acting as a spy. With no answer forthcoming, Yo-won waved his hand. Yoon-baek's right wrist twisted violently backward, the bone at his elbow forcing its way through the skin with a sickening crack. Though his body convulsed in agony, Yoon-baek was unable to scream, as an unseen energy sealed his mouth completely. Yo-won continued his interrogation, warning that if Yoon-baek refused to answer again, his remaining hand would suffer the same fate. He ordered him to nod if he understood. Yoon-baek nodded frantically, and Yo-won withdrew the intangible energy blocking his mouth. Freed at last, Yoon-baek revealed that he was a spy from the Eastern Depot. Yo-won immediately pressed further, questioning whether that meant Yoon-baek himself was a eunuch. Yoon-baek denied it in panic, explaining that he had merely been trained there and was not a eunuch. Hearing this, Yo-won felt inward disappointment, judging Yoon-baek to be completely useless to him. Yo-won then demanded to know why Yoon-baek had been embedded within the palace's special squad, questioning whether he had been assigned to monitor Prince Chen. The eunuch, listening from the side, reacted inwardly with shock, unsettled by how casually Yo-won addressed His Imperial Highness, and wondering whether Yo-won was not in fact Prince Chen's subordinate. Under the pressure of Yo-won's gaze, Yoon-baek finally explained that he had been ordered to investigate whether His Imperial Highness Prince Chen had secretly formed a contract with the cult leader of the demonic cult. Yo-won sank into deep thought, inwardly questioning why the Eastern Depot would seek to confirm whether a secret contract had been formed. He concluded that they were attempting to interfere with the succession, likely aiming to prevent Prince Chen from achieving anything significant. Yoon-baek bowed repeatedly and begged for his life, pleading that if he were spared, he would ensure that no harm ever reached His Imperial Highness Prince Chen. The eunuch watched this scene inwardly, struck by how overwhelmingly terrifying Yo-won was. He noted the contradiction with unease, knowing that Yoon-baek had been trained to take his own life if exposed as a spy, yet was now groveling and begging to live instead. Yo-won responded coldly, finding the situation strange and questioned when he had ever stated that Yoon-baek would be allowed to live. Before Yoon-baek could properly react or explain himself, his neck was snapped in an instant, his body collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Yo-won reflected inwardly that killing everyone present would be the simplest solution. However, he judged that if all of them vanished at once, the royal family would inevitably tighten its security, making it far more difficult to uncover spies connected to the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts section. He weighed his options carefully, uncertain of the best course of action. The leader, the eunuch, believed with certainty that he would be next. Struggling for breath, he forced out desperate words, begging Yo-won to listen and promising to speak. Yo-won ignored him at first and tightened his grip around the eunuch's throat, intending to choke him. Only then did the eunuch hurriedly propose that if his life were spared, he would serve Yo-won as a residential guest of the Eastern Depot, insisting that they valued talented individuals. Yo-won paused and considered this inwardly. If the man truly held the status of a residential guest within the Eastern Depot, then there had to be more to him. Yo-won decided to observe further before acting. He responded with cold skepticism, questioning the absurdity of being invited as a residential guest and doubting the eunuch's credibility. The eunuch observed silently and noted that Yo-won's grip on his throat had loosened slightly. This confirmed his assumption that Yo-won's resolve was wavering. Believing that Yo-won's mission had failed, he reasoned that offering something of value might change Yo-won's mind, and he judged that his gamble had succeeded. Thinking carefully, the eunuch revealed his identity, stating that he was Dae-dung, the Great Hall Master of the Eastern Depot, and that he possessed sufficient authority to recommend talented individuals. Yo-won assessed this information and concluded that the man's status aligned with his expectations, knowing that the Great Hall Master ranked 4th in power within the Eastern Depot. Dae-dung proceeded cautiously, probing whether Yo-won might have accepted a quest from the Western Depot. Hearing this, Yo-won's thoughts shifted inwardly. If the Eastern Depot was clashing not only with the embroidered uniform guards, but also with the Western Depot, then this entanglement could allow him to uncover spies from both the Western Depot and the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect through the network previously identified by Elder Huan. He recognized that the situation was growing increasingly complex. Although he had not intended to involve himself in their conflicts, he decided that playing along would be beneficial, as he still needed to uncover more information. After a brief pause, Yo-won deliberately responded that he could not say. Dae-dung reacted inwardly with certainty, concluding that his suspicion had been correct. He reasoned that they would not hesitate to spend vast resources if they had hired a martial artist of Yo-won's caliber. He further judged that if he could successfully persuade Yowon, the Eastern Depot would gain the upper hand. Dae-dong spoke with extreme caution, promising inward desperation as he attempted to bargain. He insisted that whatever Yowon had received in return elsewhere, the Eastern Depot could offer far more than that. Before he could finish, Yowon erupted in rage, denouncing the idea outright and rejecting the notion that he was someone who could be bought with money. Dae-dong froze in terror and hastily tried to correct himself, insisting that he had not meant it that way. He explained that the general could instead recommend Yowon to the Soul King, emphasizing Yowon's exceptional skill. The Soul King, Ju Taegyum, was the first prince and the man currently closest to the emperor's position. Countless civil servants supported him, and the Eastern Depot operated under his authority. Yowon questioned whether such a recommendation to his Imperial Highness was truly possible. Dae-dong hurriedly affirmed that it was, stating that his Imperial Majesty would surely be pleased to see a Grandmaster of Yowon's caliber. He added that he had intended to report to the general regardless. At that moment, Yowon released his grip. Dae-dong collapsed to the ground, gasping as he struck the floor. Yowon reflected inwardly. In the worst-case scenario, the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect might be affiliated with the Soul King. If that were true, their objective would extend beyond influencing Jianghu and into manipulating the royal family itself. He found the prospect increasingly troublesome, yet resolved to play along for now. With a light tap of his palm, Yowon smiled faintly and entrusted the matter to the Great Hall Master. Meanwhile, on the left side of the Imperial Dragon Palace stood the Flower Palace, the exclusive domain of the court maids and the Emperor. To its west lay a bamboo forest, through which a figure wrapped in cloth slipped in secret. Though dusk had darkened the surroundings, the intruder moved confidently without a light, clearly familiar with the path. Unbeknownst to him, his movements had already drawn unwanted attention. Someone intended for him to die. Like the intruder, the follower concealed his face. The man clad in gold shield armor was a warrior of the demonic cult. Chun Yo-won was not the only one who had infiltrated the Imperial Palace in search of answers. His men were also moving in the shadows, tracking suspicious figures to uncover the 5 spies. After traveling through the bamboo forest for a long while, the cloaked figure suddenly stopped. Half an hour later, another presence emerged. Though the darkness obscured details, moonlight filtering through the bamboo revealed a familiar silhouette and attire, one the elite had seen countless times. The figure was an elderly court maid. Draped in a red silk robe, she carried herself like a high-ranking martial artist among the court maids. The demonic cult warrior focused intently, controlling his breathing to observe without revealing himself. In an instant, the image of the court maid vanished. She reappeared directly behind him without warning. Reacting purely on instinct, the demonic cult warrior kicked a bamboo stalk toward her in an attempt to create distance and flee. Before he could act further, a powerful strike landed on his exposed neck. The blow robbed him of consciousness, and his body collapsed onto the ground. With calm finality, the court maid declared inward resolve as she initiated the purge. Deep within the bamboo forest, the eyes of countless hidden figures flickered to life, answering her signal. Under the darkened sky, a castle on the eastern side served as the residence of the eunuchs of the Eastern Depot. Roughly 10 people moved together toward the innermost section of the eastern grounds. Dae-dong was visibly delighted, inwardly celebrating the fact that a martial arts expert of Yowon's caliber was willing to join the Eastern Depot, convinced that the general would be immensely pleased. Yowon, however, felt increasingly irritated by Dae-dong's non-stop chatter. It was the first time he had encountered someone as talkative as Hobam, and the comparison only worsened his mood. As his irritation grew, they approached a building. Dae-dong indicated a direction ahead, and a massive manor soon came into view. Yowon observed the structure carefully, judging that it was large enough to accommodate at least 3,000 people. The sight reinforced the saying that the royal palace of the Great Ming Empire was overflowing with eunuchs. Upon reaching the entrance, Dae-dong questioned the guard stationed there, asking whether the general had returned. The guards confirmed that he had not, and further added that the right emissary had also yet to return. Dae-dong fell into deep thought. He reasoned inwardly that their mission must be taking longer than expected, possibly because His Imperial Highness Prince Chen had returned. Concern crept in as he realized he could not allow Yowon into the Eastern Hall without the general present, nor without at least obtaining the right emissary's permission. An inexplicable sense of awkwardness and unease settled over Yowon. While Dae-dong pondered the situation, he eventually devised an alternative. Dae-dong suggested that since the general had not yet returned, Yowon could first meet emissary Gaeum in the guest hall. Yowon agreed without objection. Relieved, Daedong gestured for Yowon to follow him, explaining that the guest hall was not far away. Feeling fortunate that the situation had resolved itself, he led the way. However, as they proceeded, Yowon abruptly stopped, his gaze fixed on something unseen, his expression tightening into a frown. Daedong noticed and questioned what was wrong, but Yowon did not respond. He remained silent, his attention fully captured by what he sensed. Inwardly, Yowon felt disturbed by a strange mixture of energies, something otherworldly that unsettled him deeply. On the outskirts of the eastern grounds stood the Eastern Hall, located a short distance from the Northern Manor. From the courtyard leading to the main hall, 30 people stood facing one another. Among them stood a middle-aged man with a scar running down his face to his cheek. Unlike the other eunuchs, he made no effort to conceal his appearance. Sweat poured down his face as regret surged through him inwardly, cursing his own actions and realizing he should never have done this. That man was Hobum, wearing a skin mask. As he always had, Hobum had followed Chun Yowon and joined the operation. Like the leader of the darkness sect who had infiltrated the palace, Hobum had been assigned to track down one of the spies alongside Yowon. Acting boldly, he had managed to make direct contact with the spy he was tasked to follow while on the way to the palace. Encouraged by how smoothly things were progressing, Hobum entered the Eastern Depot, only to be immediately assigned work the moment he stepped inside, without even a chance to gather information. Frustration churned within him as he realized he needed to escape as quickly as possible and report back to the Demon Lord. However, he judged that escape was impossible at the moment. The men selected alongside him were all highly skilled in martial arts, and more troubling still, he could not discern the martial arts realm of emissary Guillaume, who sat above them. The uncertainty alone made his situation far more dangerous. A eunuch stepped forward and delivered a report to the highest seat, where the Eastern Depot's left emissary sat deep in thought. His mind drifted back to a past exchange with one of the leaders of the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. In that memory, the figure had ordered that the entire schedule be adjusted since the prince's appointing ceremony would now be held during the NANO festival. The emissary had tried to respond cautiously, pointing out that the location of the Imperial Palace Guardians was still unclear and that his predecessor had lost his life by underestimating the enemy. He had warned against acting rashly after the incident at the abandoned Sword Valley. Before he could finish, a thin cut had been carved across his cheek, blood dripping down as punishment. The woman had asserted her authority, reminding the emissary of his subordinate position and making it clear that disobedience or resistance would not be tolerated. Back in the present, the emissary burned inwardly with restrained fury. He acknowledged that the rumors were true. That woman was indeed the most unhinged among the six martial arts sect leaders. Even now, the memory of being struck while undercover within the royal palace filled him with resentment. The reporting eunuch concluded by stating that only the most talented individuals had been selected, ending the report respectfully. From a distance, Hobum watched the emissary closely. Unease grew as he inwardly questioned why the emissary remained seated in silence, his expression dark. The delay gnawed at him as his need to leave grew more urgent with every passing moment. Unable to endure the tension any longer, Hobum coughed in an attempt to draw attention. The instant the sound escaped him, the expressions of the 30 warriors facing the emissary stiffened simultaneously. Hobum was confused, but the reason became clear almost immediately. The emissary, whose attention had been drawn, rose from his seat, swept his gaze across the area, and erupted in fury as he demanded to know who had coughed. Hobum froze inwardly, stunned by the intensity of the reaction, realizing with alarm that the emissary had become enraged over nothing more than a single cough and judging him to be utterly unhinged. Without a word, every warrior present slowly turned their gaze toward Hobum. In that instant, Hobum understood his blunder, inwardly cursing the fact that none of them showed the slightest loyalty. The eunuch who had been delivering the report immediately recognized the culprit. He turned toward the emissary in panic and hastily apologized, explaining that the man was named Mu Chung, that it was his very first day, and that he knew nothing, desperately pleading for mercy. The emissary's expression darkened further. Learning that the man was a newcomer only sharpened his disdain. He rebuked him for daring to cough while he was deep in thought, branding him a fool. Hobum quickly lowered his head further, feigning remorse. He bowed deeply and apologized loudly, begging for forgiveness. In the next instant, the emissary launched himself from his seat and shot toward Hobum, striking with lethal intent aimed at crushing his head. Hobum, already tense and alert, reacted instinctively and retreated several steps in an instant. instant. His heart pounded inwardly as fear surged through him, realizing that his skull would have been shattered had he reacted even a moment slower. The emissary accused him not only of coughing, but of daring to evade his punishment. His face twisted with malice as he declared that he would personally show him how harsh life in the Eastern Depot truly was. Internal energy gathered violently around the emissary's palm as he charged forward, his sharp nails gleaming with killing intent. Hobum panicked inwardly, torn between two equally fatal choices. Dodging again would only worsen the situation, yet failing to dodge would mean certain death. In desperation, Hobum evaded the attack once more and shoved another warrior into the path of the strike. The emissary's sharp nails pierced straight through the man's chest, ending him instantly. A eunuch shouted in alarm for everyone to retreat, warning that they would all die if they were caught in the chaos. Hobum's continued evasions only fueled the emissary's rage further. Consumed by fury, the emissary tore through the surrounding warriors without restraint, cutting them down as he forced his way toward Hobum. When he finally closed the distance, he unleashed a devastating palm strike directly into Hobum's chest. Hobum hastily reinforced himself with enhanced energy, forming a defensive barrier. Even so, the impact blasted him backward, sending him flying across the ground. As he struggled to regain balance, Hobum weighed whether to fight or flee. However, with danger pressing in from all sides and no clear path of escape, he understood that running was no longer an option. Left with no alternative, he resolved to fight back. Hobum surged forward and charged at the emissary, moving past him with blinding speed while releasing a series of swift attacks. A thin slash grazed the emissary's cheek, drawing blood. The warriors and eunuchs looked on in shock as they realized that the emissary was being overpowered. The emissary swung his fist in fury, hurling an insult born of rage as he attacked. Hobum dropped his posture low and, with fluid acrobatic motion, launched a flying kick straight into the emissary's face. Blood spilled from the emissary's mouth as Hobum pressed the assault and moved in to follow with a punch. At that instant, the emissary hastily reinforced himself, erecting an enhanced energy barrier around his body. The punch landed squarely but failed to inflict any damage, rebounding harmlessly off the barrier. Before Hobum could adjust, the emissary closed in with his sharp nails, aimed to kill. Suddenly, someone stepped in front of Hobum and dispersed the emissary's attack entirely. Despite the emissary's reputation as a formidable figure, his strike was easily blocked. The intervening man immediately counterattacked, unleashing a relentless barrage of powerful strikes that rained down upon the emissary. As the emissary struggled to defend himself, he realized inwardly that he was unable to counterattack at all and could only deflect the incoming blows. He questioned what kind of sword technique could be this overwhelmingly powerful and concluded that he would need to rely entirely on reinforced chi to maintain his defensive barrier. As the emissary raised his hand to block yet another assault, the man seized his arm in an unyielding grip. The emissary felt a surge of twisted delight, assuming the man had resorted to restraining him out of desperation. Believing this to be proof that his opponent could no longer attack directly. He prepared to plunge his nails into the man's heart. Before he could act, a tearing pain ripped through his body. Blood burst forth as the impossible happened. The man tore the emissary's arm off with his bare hand. The emissary screamed as the agony of shattered bones and severed flesh overwhelmed him. The pain was excruciating, yet he endured it long enough to stagger backward several steps. Clutching his bleeding wrist, he glared at the unknown man with hatred and disbelief. Inwardly, the emissary reeled at the realization that even a mere member of the embroidered uniform guards possessed martial arts of such terrifying caliber. At that moment, the man sent a telepathic message to Hobum, calmly asking whether he had been injured. Hobum, who had nearly lost his life moments earlier, stared at the man in shock. Recognition struck him instantly. The one standing before him was none other than Chun Yo-won. Yo-won acknowledged Hobum's efforts, praising him for what he had done. Hobum reacted in confusion, unable to understand what he had accomplished. Yo-won clarified that Hobum had successfully located the spy from the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. Hobum was left stunned. The realization had never once crossed his mind. His gaze shifted toward the emissary, whose body was soaked in blood as he desperately attempted to seal the wound where his arm had been torn away. The emissary stared at Yowon in disbelief. Inwardly, he rejected the possibility that a martial artist of such caliber could belong to the embroidered uniform guards. If Yowon was not affiliated with the royal palace, then the question of who he truly was shook him deeply. At that moment, Yowon sensed an otherworldly presence rapidly approaching from afar. He immediately issued an urgent warning to Hobam through telepathy, instructing him to be ready to either flee or hide the moment a signal was given. Hobam felt utterly lost at the sudden command, unable to grasp what was about to unfold. The instant Yowon gave the signal, both of them vanished from sight like bolts of lightning. The emissary's expression stiffened. He too felt it, an unfamiliar energy racing toward them at terrifying speed. He shouted frantically, ordering everyone to draw their weapons at once and remain on guard. Confusion rippled through the ranks, but the emissary silenced all hesitation, demanding immediate obedience. As the cold, alien energy spread, the wind began to twist unnaturally, flowing in impossible directions. One by one, the torches lining the walls were extinguished, plunging the entire area into darkness. Soon after, small orbs of light began appearing across the walls and ceiling, accompanied by faint, unsettling sounds. The emissary scanned his surroundings with narrowed eyes. Then he saw them. Countless eyes had encircled the building. Glowing yellow beneath the moonlight, they stared unblinkingly at those trapped inside. Panic spread as the warriors struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The presence surrounding them felt deeply ominous, unlike anything they had encountered before. The emissary realized inwardly that they were all palace servants, yet the energy they emitted was foreign and unsettling. They were clearly not ordinary servants, but neither did they feel like martial artists. The contradiction made his blood run cold. At that moment, a figure emerged calmly in the center of the courtyard. She declared that she had chased down the rats who had infiltrated the royal palace, yet only one remained behind. The woman revealed herself as the second-ranked court maid, the treasurer of the imperial palace, Yangwol. The emissary called out in disbelief upon recognizing Yangwol, attempting to question her mention of rats. As he turned around mid-thought, shock seized him. Both figures were gone without a trace. The emissary reeled inwardly as he realized that both the embroidered uniform guard and the man who had coughed had vanished completely. He concluded that they must have escaped during the moment the torches were extinguished, and fury mixed with frustration churned within him. Yangwol stated calmly that she had been observing the Eastern faction's guest hall for quite some time, having already known that spies were concealed within it. The emissary erupted in rage, rejecting the accusation outright. He demanded to know what she meant by spies and asserted that this was Eastern Depot territory, declaring that even the Imperial Palace's treasurer had no authority to come and go freely as she pleased. Yangwol responded coldly, clarifying that she was not present in her capacity as the head of the court maids. The emissary questioned her words in confusion, unable to grasp her meaning. Yangwol then revealed her true standing, stating that she was here as the first in command among the three great supremes of the Imperial Palace Guardians, the very force the emissary had been desperately searching for. The Imperial Palace Guardians were a hidden force of the royal palace, rumored to possess martial arts so advanced that even most warriors of the Jianghu could not rival them. The emissary had exhausted every means to locate them, extending his search through the embroidered uniform guards and even the Western Depot. Realization struck the emissary inwardly. He understood that Yangwol knew far more than he had expected. With his right arm already lost, he judged that confronting her directly would be a fatal mistake. Feigning innocence, the emissary protested that she was overstepping her authority by accusing them so brazenly. He pointed to his severed arm, insisting that they were victims as well. Yangwol dismissed his words without hesitation. In her eyes, his injury meant nothing. She regarded him as nothing more than a rat bitten by another rat. With final authority, Yangwol issued her command, ordering that everyone be arrested and granting permission to kill any who resisted. The moment her order was given, the court maids surged into the courtyard in unison. The recruits, gripped by fear and uncertainty over their fate, tightened their grips and swung their spears. Shouts rang out as they steeled themselves, insisting that even if their opponents were Imperial Palace Guardians, they were still women. It was futile. They were unable to withstand the court maids, who cut through them effortlessly as they pressed their assault. One of the warriors warriors charged forward with a spear infused with internal energy, but the court maid casually swept it aside with her palm. The man froze in shock, inwardly unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. She had used a palm technique without even circulating chi around her hand. It was unmistakably bare flesh, yet it felt as though iron had been wrapped around it. In that instant, he realized that ordinary weapons were useless against them. Switching tactics, the warrior wrapped force chi around his sword and lunged again. With a single slash, he cut into her arm. Relief flashed through his mind as he concluded inwardly that attacks reinforced with enhanced energy were effective. Their bodies were resilient, but not comparable to practitioners of divine indestructible Vajra arts. That relief lasted only a moment. The court maid surged back toward him and drove her fist straight through his neck. Blood burst forth as his life drained away, disbelief filling his final thoughts at the fact that she showed no reaction to pain. A eunuch shouted urgently, ordering the others not to lower their guard and to imbue their weapons with enhanced energy while aiming for the throats. With that, he moved swiftly. His sword, wrapped in enhanced energy, sliced off the arm of one court maid and severed the neck of another. To his horror, the one whose arm had been cut off continued moving as though she felt nothing. She was so fast that he could not even track her movements. Panic set in, and he began swinging his sword wildly in an attempt to land a hit. The court maid's eyes flashed as chi gathered into her palm. She struck the man squarely in the back. He turned instinctively, his sword flashing as he severed her neck in response. At that same moment, another court maid closed in from the side, her palm once again filled with chi. The strike landed and a cry tore from the man. It felt as though fire had been planted directly into his heart. As his internal organs burned, black smoke poured from his mouth while he gasped helplessly. Desperation drove him to swing at her again, but she stepped back cleanly. Seizing the opening, she surged forward, reinforced her palm with chi once more, and drove it straight through his abdomen. A gaping hole opened in his body, a sight that filled the emissary with dread. The emissary realized inwardly that the flame chi they were using felt far too foreign to be yang energy. It was pure fire, untainted by anything else, leading him to a terrifying conclusion he did not finish forming. The court maid who had killed the eunuch then advanced toward the emissary. She charged at him one-armed with frightening speed. Despite her velocity, the emissary's eyes tracked her movements precisely, and he seized her arm. Coldly, he asserted that she had underestimated him simply because he had lost an arm. With her arm firmly in his grasp, the emissary crushed the bones and tore it free. He then drove a chi-infused kick into her stomach, sending her body flying several steps through the air before it crashed and rolled across the ground. Holding the severed arm, the emissary stripped away the sleeve. At the sight beneath, his eyes filled with manic joy. Dense yellow scales covered the arm, shielding its owner from sword chi and countless other attacks. Having uncovered the truth, the emissary shouted in exhilaration to the remaining warriors battling the court maids, declaring that blood reversion was permitted against these insects. The moment the command echoed through the courtyard, the 4 surviving warriors let out thunderous roars as violent changes erupted within their bodies. Their upper bodies swelled grotesquely, muscle mass expanding at an unnatural speed. Bestial cries burst from their throats, and even the remaining warriors nearby recoiled in terror at the sight. The court maids did not realize that these demons had been masquerading as humans all along. Yangwol issued a sharp command, condemning their hesitation and demanding the immediate elimination of those who had bared their fangs at the imperial family. At her order, the court maids halted their previous movements and rushed directly toward the warriors who had activated blood reversion. One of the transformed beasts grinned in delight as they closed in. In midair, he seized 2 court maids by their heads and smashed them together with brutal force, crushing their skulls completely. Another court maid slipped in behind him and drove her palm, imbued with chi, into his lower abdomen. The blow failed to move him at all. He grabbed her by the neck with raw strength and slammed her into the ground, cracking the earth beneath her body. The scene descended into absolute mayhem. The blood reversion warriors tore limbs from the court maids without restraint. One seized another maid, ripped her head clean off, and hurled it across the courtyard. The severed head bounced several times before coming to rest against a distant wall. The few warriors who had not transformed were overwhelmed by fear. They scrambled away and hid behind that wall. When one of them spotted the severed head, a scream nearly escaped him, but another clamped a hand over his mouth to silence him. They prayed inwardly in panic, forcing themselves to remain quiet. They believed that making even the smallest sound would mean death, and convinced themselves that they were the only ones still alive. Unable to fight, they clung to the desperate hope of escape. Yet unease crept in. One of them sensed that something was wrong. With such chaos erupting, the outside soldiers should have already rushed in to investigate. The absence of any response filled him with dread. At that moment, something warm dripped down from the top of the wall and landed on his shoulder. He looked down and saw blood. Slowly, they all lifted their gazes upward. Frozen in horror, they saw a court maid crouched atop the wall. Her yellowed eyes gleamed with cruel delight as she stared down at them. An ominous grin spread across her face. Terror broke their composure and they fled in blind panic, running for their lives. Despair flooded them as they realized they could not outrun her. In a moment of sheer selfish terror, one warrior grabbed another from behind and hurled him toward her, sacrificing him in an attempt to slow her advance. It was useless. She moved faster than they could comprehend, slashing through him effortlessly before continuing her pursuit. One of the fleeing warriors fixated on escape, convincing himself that survival was still possible if he could just reach the outside. He seized yet another companion and threw him back as well. She cut him down without hesitation. The last remaining warrior screamed in rage and disbelief at the betrayal unfolding before him. The man sacrificing the others justified himself inwardly, believing that at least one of them had to survive to warn the rest. Before the thought could even settle, he attempted to throw the final man as well. At that instant, a blood reversion warrior burst between them and seized the pursuing court maid by the head. With overwhelming force, he hurled her into the wall. Her body struck hard and collapsed lifelessly to the ground. The two warriors were briefly overcome with relief. One of them realized with shock that he was still alive and believed for a fleeting moment that the blood reversion warrior had saved him, that perhaps they were allies after all. That realization ended instantly. The beast drove an elbow into his head with devastating force, shattering his skull. The final survivor watched in paralyzing dread. He had sacrificed his comrades to escape, only to finally understand the truth. There had never been a path out of this place. The roaring beast descended upon him, tearing his limbs apart and staining the ground in deep crimson. On the other side of the courtyard, Yangwol realized that her judgment had been correct. The emissary barked out a threat, demanding an end to what he called meaningless struggle and offering to spare Yangwol and the remaining court maids if they surrendered. Inwardly, the emissary reminded himself that their original objective had been to locate the Imperial Palace Guardians and uncover the source of the otherworldly power. To his surprise, Yangwol remained completely unfazed. She dismissed him coldly, noting that his eyes were still clouded with greed. She pointed out that he had truly believed those beasts would be enough to overwhelm the Imperial Palace Guardians, and declared that he had gravely underestimated them. With a flick of her fingers, two court maids wearing veils appeared behind her. Through their veils, yellow glowing eyes shone forth, radiating an energy distinctly different from that of the other court maids. Yangwol issued her command, ordering them to assist the court maids and exterminate every remaining beast. They bowed in unison and acknowledged the order. In an instant, they moved with blinding speed. The court maids had been battered and killed mercilessly, unable to hold their ground as the beasts tore through them without restraint. The beasts laughed and mocked their opponents, boasting that such attacks could not even scratch their bodies. Before the mockery could finish, the beast's head was severed in a single motion. The remaining beast stared in stunned silence as the head rolled across the ground. A furious curse escaped him as he raged at the woman responsible. The supervisor maid, her weapon wreathed in flame chi, walked calmly past the collapsing body. The beast charged her in blind rage, demanding to know who they were. Her sword, infused with flame chi, wrapped around his arm like a blazing shackle, piercing into the flesh. The beast froze inwardly, stunned by the sensation, realizing that the blade felt as though it had been heated in fire for an extended time. She yanked the sword back, seized his arm, and channeled flame chi directly through her palm. Smoke immediately began to rise from his limb. In the next instant, his arm was severed, and a shrill scream of agony tore from his throat as pain consumed him. She moved again and slashed across the back of his calves, the blade cutting deep into the flesh. With a heavy crash, the beast dropped to his knees. In that instant, the man realized the truth inwardly. She was different from the other court maids. She had learned genuine martial arts. Her flame chi surged once more as she prepared the final strike. In panic, the beast turned toward the others and tried to warn them to attack her together. The warning was never completed. Her blade flashed and his head was severed cleanly from his body. The remaining beasts attempted to rush forward, but they were too late. Seizing the opening, the court maids lunged in unison. With palms imbued with flame chi, they struck directly into one of the beast's bodies. No matter how sturdy a beast's body was, repeated strikes to the same point with flame chi inevitably broke it down. The beast's roar shook the ground before dissolving into a scream of agony as pain finally overwhelmed him. Watching the scene unfold, the emissary fell into despair inwardly. They were at a clear disadvantage. Even with reinforced bodies, the beast could not nullify the flame chi attacks. Channeling internal energy into his palm, the emissary concluded inwardly that only one option remained: to subdue their leader. He moved at once, circling behind Yongwol with swift precision. The moment he attacked, her palms moved in perfect coordination, blocking every possible strike. She then reached out and seized the emissary by the neck. Yongwol reprimanded him coldly, condemning his habit of attacking from behind. The emissary tried to strike her arm repeatedly in an attempt to loosen her grip, but it was futile. Her hold felt like reinforced steel, unmoving no matter how many times he struck it. Yongwol dismissed him as a fool and judged that there was no longer any need to keep him alive. She tightened her grip and began to choke him. As his breath was cut off, the emissary panicked inwardly. His neck felt as though it would snap, and with no other option left, he activated the blood reversion art. His body expanded grotesquely, forcing him free from her grasp. Yongwol reacted instantly, retreating several steps back. At that moment, someone leapt in from behind and seized the emissary's head. It was Yowon. With Nano's assistance, Yowon released a powerful electric shock directly into the emissary's head. A violent current tore through his body, forcing a scream of agony from him. As the undyed energy invaded him, the blood reversion art, driven by an altered energy flow, collapsed. His body convulsed violently, his hair burned away, leaving him bald. The emissary continued cursing until the moment he lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Yongwol observed Yowon with extreme caution. Inwardly, she sensed that the ominous energy emanating from him was abnormal. He had neutralized a blood reversion beast with a single lightning strike, marking him as extraordinarily dangerous. Yowon noticed her silence and understood that she was wary of him. Deciding to act first, he stated that he had no intention of fighting her. Yongwol reacted with confusion at his words. Yowon explained that he had come only because he needed the emissary, not because he wished to make an enemy of the royal family. At that moment, Yongwol's expression stiffened completely as his audacity fully registered. Flame chi erupted around Yongwol as she lashed out in fury. She accused Yowon of daring to deceive her, one of the three great supremes of the Imperial Palace Guardians, and questioned whether she would ever trust the words of a man who had trespassed into the Imperial Palace. Yowon watched the flames surge toward him and reflected inwardly. He realized that the otherworldly energy he had sensed earlier was the Imperial Palace's hidden power itself. He recalled the warnings of former cult leaders who had always stressed that the pact with the Imperial Palace should never be broken because the royal family's concealed strength was difficult to measure. Their power was fundamentally different from ordinary martial arts, operating on an entirely separate level. Yongwol suddenly surged forward, closing the distance with astonishing speed, almost as if she had teleported. She reached for Yowon's neck with lethal intent. Yowon calmly raised his hand and lightly struck her attacking arm. Anticipating his response, her other hand immediately targeted him, but he blocked it just as cleanly. Yowon reacted faster still. His left hand moved in a blur and stopped directly before her forehead. Yongwol did not retreat. She forced herself forward instead. Yowon's forced chi struck her forehead head on. Blood spilled from the reopened wound as she was driven back 10 steps. She did not even blink. Yowon noted inwardly that she did not appear to feel pain. She wiped the blood from her forehead and charged again. Appearing behind him, she raked at his arm with nails infused with flame chi. Yowon blocked the strike instantly, but she still managed to seize his arm, scorching it with intense heat. Yowon retaliated with a fierce strike, sending her flying like a pebble into the wall. Undeterred, she lunged back at full speed. Her internal energy, saturated with flame chi, crashed into him repeatedly. Yowon continued to block without counterattacking, deliberately holding back and refusing to strike her down. He then glanced at his arm. The trace of flame left by her attack had not faded. The heat lingered, as if the fire were attempting to burrow into his skin. Yongwol leapt away, scattering traces of fire that embedded themselves into the cracked ground. From every direction, flames surged toward Yowon. He looked down just in time and leapt backward as the flames collided, detonating into a swirling vortex of fire. Before she could comprehend what had happened, Yowon was already upon her. Force chi hovered above her head, leaving her no time to react. She crossed her arms to block instinctively. Instead of force chi, Yowon released a palm strike driven purely by wind. The flames surrounding Yongwol were extinguished as the wind swept them away. She dug her leg into the ground to maintain her footing, resisting the force rather than being blown back. A strained sound escaped her as she braced herself, convinced she was about to be subdued. Yet Yowon did not press further force onto her. Yowon observed her carefully and noticed that the wound on her forehead was healing rapidly, in a manner strikingly similar to NANO's regenerative ability. He reflected inwardly. The residual flame chi she had left behind was still trying to creep further up his arm. He found it surprising that a woman carrying such dense yin energy could wield flame chi so freely. The sensation reminded him of the yin energy he had once absorbed into his heavenly demonic energy from another woman. Without delay, Yowon gathered his internal energy and guided it through his veins. The stubborn flame clinging to his hand weakened, then vanished in a hiss of steam. The sight caused Yongwol to stiffen. Yongwol realized inwardly that the amount of yin energy he possessed was abnormal. Even if she had not used her full power, the fact that he had erased her flame chi so effortlessly unsettled her deeply. She accused him of invading the Imperial Palace while relying solely on his martial arts to protect him. Yowon replied calmly that he had no intention of making an enemy of the Imperial Palace. He stated that if she allowed him to take the man, he would leave quietly. His gaze shifted to the unconscious emissary as he explained that this man was a spy from the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect, a group scheming against the Jianghu. To Yowon, the emissary was no different from a corrupt organization threatening everything she was sworn to protect. Yongwol reacted with surprise at the name, questioning whether all of this had been done to stop that sect. Yowon affirmed it, explaining that while the Jianghu and the Imperial Palace were meant to remain neutral, the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect was attempting to exploit the palace for its own schemes. That was why he was trying to uncover who stood behind it all and put an end to them. Yongwol rejected his reasoning outright. She declared that she could not allow him to leave, pointing out that the founding emperor and his successors had shown mercy toward the Jianghu, acknowledging its existence. For such a sect to now attempt to sow internal conflict within the Imperial Palace was unacceptable to her. Yowon realized inwardly that he had already revealed far more information than he intended in an effort to clear the misunderstanding. Despite that, she was not listening at all. Her way of thinking was fundamentally different from his. Yongwol insisted that even the Jianghu depended on the reign of the emperor. Yowon responded coldly, stating that she had left him no choice and that he had already warned her. Yongwol's expression darkened as she questioned what warning he could possibly mean. With a sharp snap of her fingers, she challenged him to see how long he could maintain his arrogance. At her signal, dozens of court maids gathered behind her at once. Yongwol curled her lips into a cruel grin and inwardly dismissed any reputation Yowon might have held within the Jianghu. She regarded this place as the Imperial Palace and mocked him as an arrogant man of the Jianghu, convinced he would be forced to struggle alone against them. Yowon let out a quiet sigh and smiled faintly. He questioned the assumption that he was alone, calmly implying that such an idea was deeply mistaken. At that moment, three figures clad entirely in black appeared atop the eastern wall and the roof of the guest hall. Yongwol stiffened. The presence of these individuals had escaped her senses entirely, their energy so perfectly concealed that she had not detected them until now. The realization struck her inwardly that Yowon had never been alone. As she looked up, she saw one man wearing a junior officer's uniform, his face marked with scars. When she attempted to examine the others, one of them vanished in an instant. The Great Guardian Markham knelt before Yowon and acknowledged his call. Yongwol reeled inwardly in disbelief. She could not accept that she had failed to sense enemies of this caliber. Despite his respectful posture, Markham released an overwhelming pressure that flooded outward in all directions, crashing down upon the court maids. Dread swept through them as their bodies locked in place. Panic spread as they realized they could not move at all, their senses screaming with the feeling of imminent death under that crushing energy. Yongwol erupted in rage, accusing Yowon of hiding such forces until now. In response, the Right Guardian stepped forward. His face was concealed behind a mask, and his presence carried a chilling authority. He questioned who would dare speak to their lord in such a manner. Li Hameng drew his blade. Yongwol observed him closely and realized inwardly that his energy too was far from ordinary. One of the supervising court maids shouted a warning, demanding that he stop and reminding him where he stood. The threat went unanswered. Hameng continued forward without hesitation. Sensing the danger radiating from him, the supervisor immediately infused flame chi into her sword, abandoning any further warnings. Li Hameng coldly cautioned her against lowering her guard simply because she could wield flame chi. Her sword lashed out and struck his. The moment the blades met, red flames erupted from Hameng's sword and collided violently with hers. Cracks spread across her weapon the instant it made contact. With his sword engulfed in crimson flames, Hameng declared inward resolve and dominance, revealing himself as the blade of crimson fire that cut through flames themselves. He charged. Their swords clashed, unleashing waves of searing heat. Explosions of inferno engulfed the surroundings, incinerating everything nearby. The court maid leapt backward in desperation to save herself. Her sword shattered into fragments as fear tightened her expression. Hameng assessed her calmly, noting inwardly that he had aimed to pierce her heart, yet she had narrowly evaded it. He further observed that the court maids had already overpowered the warriors who had used the demonic blood reversion art, judging that their martial prowess rivaled that of the evolutionary realm. Yangwol watched in mounting dread as the reality sank in. She could not comprehend how her sword had been destroyed by an even stronger flame chi, a power that completely overwhelmed her own. At that realization, the supervisor maid's eyes narrowed sharply. She had recognized him. The unmistakable flame-red hair and the presence of the crimson fire sword left no room for doubt. She identified him as the Flame King, Li Hameng. Being recognized so directly caused Li Hameng's expression to twist in brief embarrassment beneath the mask. Shock rippled through Yangwol. If the man before her was truly the Flame King, then he should belong to the demonic cult. The implication struck her a heartbeat later, and her breath caught. If that was the case, then the masked man standing beside him could only be one person. He was the Great Guardian Markham. The Imperial Palace Guardians had protected the palace ever since the non-aggression treaty between the Imperial Court and the Jianghu was established. The Jianghu had always been regarded as a potential threat to the Imperial Palace, but among all its forces, the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult was considered the greatest danger of all. Yangwol reflected inwardly on what she knew. The head of that organization was treated as a lord, commanding nearly 100,000 followers. Rumors claimed that his subordinates would willingly throw themselves into hellfire if he ordered it. A question formed in her mind, sharp and uneasy, as she wondered whether this man had truly come without hostile intent. She demanded an answer, questioning Yowon directly, and asking once more whether he was the leader of the demonic cult. Yowon let out a quiet sigh, realizing that there was no longer any way to slip out of the situation. At that moment, Hameng sent a telepathic message to Yowon, apologizing. Hameng reflected inwardly with mild frustration. He had dyed his hair dark before leaving the cult, yet the color always reverted whenever he used his inner energy. He questioned whether simply covering his head would have been the wiser choice. Yangwol noticed Yowon's lack of denial and drew her conclusion inwardly. He truly was the leader. According to Imperial law, anyone who invaded the Imperial Palace was to be captured immediately and executed if they resisted. However, she understood that this situation was far from simple. Having made her decision, Yangwol bowed deeply. She formally apologized for her earlier disrespect, explaining that she had not realized his identity. She acknowledged his status as the leader of the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult, yet stated that she could not simply overlook the fact that he had entered the Imperial Palace without notice. Despite the non-aggression treaty, she declared that she would inform the head of the Imperial Palace Guardians so the matter could be handled smoothly, and requested that he accompany her. Inwardly, Yangwol assumed he would cooperate, given her polite approach. With his identity exposed, she believed he could not afford to cause further trouble within the palace. At that, Yowon's lips curved into a faint smile. Yangwol interpreted the expression inwardly as agreement. She decided that she would escort him to the Imperial Palace Guardians, and even entertained the thought that His Imperial Majesty might be enraged by this incident and break the non-aggression pact. She expressed her thanks and began instructing Yowon to follow her. Before she could finish, a sharp slashing sound echoed through the air. The sound faded, and thin red lines surfaced across the bodies of the 5 court maids standing between Chun Yowon and Yangwol. Shock tore through Yangwol as she realized that he had slaughtered them without hesitation, something she had never imagined possible. Yowon coldly remarked that the exchange had been entertaining while it lasted. He stated that she had cloaked her intentions in polite words, but in the end, she had intended to stab him in the back. Yangwol protested inwardly and outwardly, insisting that she had never said or acted in such a way, and that she had only planned to assist him while involving the higher authorities. Yowon dismissed it outright. A powerful pressure began to radiate from his body. He declared that he had already warned her. His proposal would have benefited her side as well, but she was the one who had forfeited her right to choose. Yongwol countered fiercely, questioning whether he was unafraid of the consequences. She asserted that if his Imperial Majesty learned of this, the non-aggression pact could be broken. Yowon's expression darkened. He questioned what consequences remained, stating that everyone present would simply be regarded as having died while fighting members of the Eastern Depot. Yongwol's soul trembled as she grasped the scheme he was setting in motion. Yowon issued his command, ordering the Great Guardian and the Right Guardian to spare no one. The moment the command fell, both moved instantly, as if they had been waiting for it all along. They surged forward with overwhelming force, reducing Yongwol and the remaining court maid to the level of ordinary mortals facing execution. Yongwol screamed for her subordinates to stop them at once. Her command fell flat. Unlike their leader, the court maid expressions went blank, as terror and helplessness overtook them. The speed and efficiency of the attackers were on an entirely different level. They cut through the court maid without resistance. They were the infamous ranked guardians of the demonic cult. Blows landed in rapid succession, and the crimson blade of Hameng cut them down mercilessly. Yongwol watched in despair as the reality became undeniable. The innate core energy possessed by their enemies far exceeded anything they could contend with. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted as a shadow slipped past her back. Bearing the title of Wind God, Markham moved with terrifying speed. At the velocity of the wind itself, he sliced through the throats of the court maids one after another. His movements were so fluid and elusive that even those court maids who displayed beast-like resilience could not perceive what was happening. Markham stood in a league of his own, decapitating anyone who crossed his path without slowing down. Yongwol realized inwardly that he had passed her deliberately, as though mocking her existence. She concluded that they were completely disregarding the power of the Imperial Palace. Flame gathered around her hand as she declared that she had been left with no choice. From that moment on, she regarded them as enemies of the Imperial Palace and resolved to exterminate the demonic cult. Yowon observed her carefully. He sensed that her energy had changed. Although his head guardian and right guardian were present, he judged that caution was necessary to ensure Hobum was not caught in the chaos. He noted that her arm possessed steel-like hardness and resolved to warn Hobum accordingly. Yongwol summoned the Imperial Palace guardians, and the two responded immediately. She stated that there was little time left and ordered them to bring Yowon down together while his guardians were occupied with the court maids. The two hesitated in shock, inwardly struggling with the realization that their target was the leader of the demonic cult. Yongwol pressed on, stating that she had nearly matched him earlier, and that with their assistance, they could subdue him. She ordered them to create an opening for her. Their hesitation only darkened her expression further. She commanded them to move at once. Suppressing their doubts, the two advanced together. They charged toward Yowon at raw, unrefined speed. One imbued flame chi into her palm, while the other infused it into her sword, which lashed out like a whip. Before either attack could reach him, Markham appeared and drove his elbow into one of them, sending her flying away. The other was intercepted by Hobum. Hobum raised the severed arm of a court maid, its yellow scales still intact, and used it to block the incoming blade. He charged Chi into his fist and declared that regardless of the reason, she had no right to raise a sword against the Demon Lord. Bam! His fist struck her chest directly with crushing force. The impact sent her skidding back 10 steps before she managed to stop herself, her feet carving into the ground. Hobum stared in disbelief. Inwardly, he acknowledged that he had known her arm was sturdy, but he had never imagined it to be this solid. He realized that he had poured nearly all of his chi into that strike, yet it had barely affected her at all. The court maid judged his strength and inwardly concluded that he stood around the supreme peak, remarking that not all members of the demonic cult were truly formidable. She surged toward him and dismissed him outright, declaring that his tricks were meaningless and ordering him to move aside. Her sword, wrapped in flame chi, lashed around him like a whip. Driven into desperation, Hobum tried to block the attack, but before it could land, the Flame King intervened. Li Hameng stepped in, declaring that if she was dissatisfied with an opponent at the supreme peak, then he would fight her instead. His crimson sword erupted with flames. The instant it touched her blade, her sword shattered apart. Hameng slipped past her in a blur and cleaved her body cleanly in two. Her mangled corpse fell heavily before Yangwol. She hurriedly searched for the other guardian, only to find her already dead, slumped motionless near the wall. Yangwol looked around in disbelief. Everyone was dead. Every courtmaid lay slaughtered, severed heads and dismembered limbs scattered grotesquely across the courtyard. She reflected inwardly with grim resolve. Just 2 of those guardians had been enough to annihilate her forces. With no other choice left, she resolved to unleash all of her innate core energy and flame chi. Her only remaining objective was to stall for time until the Imperial army arrived in response to the chaos. Her thoughts were abruptly cut off as Yowon stepped in close. Yowon addressed her coldly, noting that she had been left completely alone and questioning how it felt to be the last one standing. Nearby, Hameng and Markham finished erasing the traces of their sword techniques. Hameng concluded that there was nothing left. Hobum added that they were finished as well, remarking that while it had taken some effort, their martial arts should no longer be identifiable. Before Hameng began to respond, the wall beside him suddenly exploded in a torrent of raging fire. Yowon was hurled across the ground, skidding violently before coming to a halt. From the incinerated wall, Yangwol shot toward him at terrifying speed. Yowon leapt backward, narrowly avoiding her strike. Her attack crashed into the shattered ground, and fire raced through the cracks like molten lava. When the flames converged, violent explosions erupted, raging like an inferno. She lunged again and thrust her palm forward. Yowon blocked the attack, continuing to defend without counterattacking. Yangwol seethed with frustration, inwardly raging as she challenged how long he intended to keep defending. She accused him of underestimating them and demanded to know if that was truly all he had. She rolled her arm and landed another strike. Flame chi collided head-on with Yowon's internal energy, and the courtyard trembled under the violent burst of fire. From a distance, Hobum and Hameng watched in dismay as thick smoke spiraled upward. Hameng realized inwardly that the heat was reaching even them. He recognized that she must have been conserving her fire chi all along. With no alternative left, he prepared himself to act, uncertain whether he could truly cut through her flames. Before he could draw his blade and move, Markham called out sharply, ordering him to stop. Markham, carrying the limp body of Emissary Gum Ye, spoke calmly. He stated that intervening now would only get in the Demon Lord's way, and that Hameng would not be able to slice through her fire chi, as it was fundamentally different from that of the other court maids. Hameng acknowledged it, but hesitated. Markham cut him off, emphasizing that more importantly, the Demon Lord was merely measuring her strength. Yowon smiled and extinguished the lingering flames on his arm guard, concluding that he had seen enough of the Imperial Palace's fire chi. Yangwol ground her teeth in rage and charged. Furious at what she perceived as mockery, she thrust her palm forward, but it struck nothing but air. In that instant, realization dawned on her. It was a mirror image technique. Yowon's voice sounded from behind her, questioning where she was looking. Yangwol swung her palm wildly behind her, yet there was nothing there either. Yowon's movement speed surpassed what her naked eyes could track. She was struck with shock as she realized that he was not only capable of the swift clone technique, but also possessed the stepping skill. Yowon moved like a bolt of lightning. Yangwol desperately tried to follow him, but failed. In a single instant, Yowon passed her, and his force chi pierced cleanly through her shoulder. She coughed up blood and stared in disbelief. A crushing realization took hold of her. He had not even used his true martial arts power against her. Humiliation and fury surged together as she stomped her foot. Yangwol lashed out recklessly, declaring that she would take him down even if it meant dying there. She lunged from behind. At that moment, Yowon's black wrist guard unfolded, and black force chi spiraled outward, forming the heavenly demon's sword that intercepted her attack. Yowon glared at her coldly, reminding her that he had already warned her. The collision between her fire chi and the black sword erupted in a deafening sonic boom. The impact hurled Yangwol's body away like a projectile. She crashed into the wall and slid down, gasping for breath. Yowon leveled his sword at her throat and observed that her injury was already closing. Yangwol cursed them bitterly, questioning whether they believed they could simply walk away after committing such atrocities. Yowon calmly asked why she thought he could not. She scoffed, insisting that the battle noise would have already alerted others and that it was only a matter of time before they were branded enemies of the Imperial Palace. Her expression twisted as she rejected the idea of a perfect crime, declaring that the Imperial Army of the Imperial Palace Guards, far stronger than herself, would arrive soon. Yowon smiled. He questioned whether she truly believed he had not accounted for the noise. His words left her confused as she looked around. Yowon explained that the entire area had been sealed within a sound barrier. With a chilling grin, he made it clear that no one was coming for her. Yongwol cried out in shock, unable to believe the existence of a sound barrier covering such a vast area. The idea felt absurd to her, something that should not have been possible. Yowon questioned her disbelief, pointing out that she had already witnessed it with her own eyes. She struggled to accept reality, wanting to deny what was happening. Even so, she waited, straining to hear even the faintest sound from outside. Nothing reached her. Yowon observed calmly that her arm had already healed once again. He judged that severing her limbs would be meaningless, and turned his thoughts toward whether decapitation would produce a different result. He raised his black sword to deliver the final strike. At the sight of it, Yongwol's face drained of color. In sheer desperation, she shouted that killing her would result in the deaths of his subordinates as well. Yowon glared at her, dismissing the claim as a bluff. Yongwol hurriedly pressed on, revealing that she had imprisoned 3 spies in disguise within the Imperial Palace Guardian's prison. At those words, Yowon's sword halted just beside her neck. Yongwol seized the moment, convinced that he would not allow his people to die. Yowon reasoned inwardly that 3 infiltrators in disguise could only mean members of the Darkness sect, and realized that they must have been captured. Noticing the hesitation on his face, Yongwol believed her gamble had succeeded. Yowon questioned her again, confirming whether they had truly been locked inside the Imperial Palace Guardian's prison. Yongwol affirmed it immediately. Until then, Yowon had appeared indifferent, but now his brows furrowed slightly. The change filled Yongwol with quiet triumph. She reflected inwardly that the demonic cult was ruthless toward its enemies, yet bound by loyalty thicker than blood. Seeing his reaction, she concluded the rumors were true. Believing he was not a heartless monster, she formed a new plan to take him to the Imperial Palace Guardians under the pretense of freeing his subordinates, where their leader would surely eliminate them all. She began to offer him a deal, promising the release of his subordinates if he spared her life. Her words never finished. Shock froze her eyes as reality shattered completely. Before she could even process what had happened, her head was severed from her body. Her head struck the ground, bounced several times, and finally rolled to a halt. Yowon walked toward the fallen head and coldly remarked that all she had done was lie. Even after her neck had been severed, she did not die immediately. Within her fading consciousness, confusion and disbelief surfaced as she wondered how everything had ended like this. That awareness lasted only a brief moment. Yowon crushed Yongwol's head beneath his foot. Blood splashed outward and her life ended completely. A faint rustling followed. Before Yowon, who appeared visibly vexed, the Great Guardian Markim and the Right Guardian Hameng descended from the rooftop. Hameng reported that they had carried out his orders and that it would be extremely difficult for anyone to identify the martial arts used based on the condition of the corpses. Markham, still carrying the unconscious emissary, asked whether they should depart immediately with him. Yowon replied that leaving had been his original intention, but he had learned that the Darkness Sect squad leaders had been captured. Markim cautiously questioned whether Yowon intended to free them. Hameng warned that doing so would be far too dangerous. He reasoned that they had been trained specifically for such situations and would most likely take their own lives if they concluded that escape was impossible. Though regrettable, he suggested abandoning any rescue attempt. Hobum reflected inwardly. Even the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect had been unable to uncover the Imperial Palace Guardians. He wondered whether there truly was no choice but to leave the captured leaders behind. Yowon rejected the idea. He stated that he had personally appointed them and that abandoning them now would make him unfit for his position. More importantly, he refused to allow them to die at the hands of these people. Hameng asked what Yowon intended to do next. He acknowledged that the evidence here had been dealt with, but pointed out that locating the squad leaders would require breaching the Imperial Palace Guardian's security. Markham proposed that there might be a way. He revealed that he had deliberately left one courtmaid alive as a contingency and suggested interrogating her. Hameng questioned whether she would truly confess. Markham answered that she almost certainly would not, then asked for permission to suggest a plan. Time passed, and moments later, the supervising courtmaid slowly regained consciousness. Confusion clouded her mind as fragmented awareness returned. She wondered inwardly whether she had lost consciousness and tried to recall what had happened. When she attempted to rise, her body failed her completely, collapsing heavily back onto the ground. As her vision steadied, she noticed numerous bodies scattered around her. The stench of blood assaulted her senses, forcing the reality of the scene upon her. Panic surged as she searched desperately for the treasurer, Yongwol, the second supreme. She found her nearby. Yongwol's body lay motionless, her hands and neck brutally severed. The sky remained dark and no one else was in sight. It was only when she tried again to move that she fully grasped her condition. A delayed realization struck her as she noticed what was missing. Both of her feet had been severed. Her face drained of color as terror consumed her. The situation felt like a living nightmare she could not escape. At that moment, a deep voice reached her ears, remarking on the fact that a court maid was still alive. She turned her head toward the sound and saw two men approaching, dressed like cadets of the Golden Guards. One of them reacted with visible shock upon seeing her amputated ankles and recognized her as one of the supervising maids. He questioned her condition, clearly alarmed. The supervising maid answered shakily, stating that she was fine, and asked when the Golden Guards had arrived. The guard explained that they had come after hearing loud disturbances, only to find the entire area turned into a field of corpses. He added that another guard had already gone to report the situation, and reinforcements would arrive soon. Hearing this, the supervising maid realized inwardly that not much time had passed. Urgency surged through her as she concluded that she needed to inform the higher authorities of the Imperial Palace Guardians immediately before the demonic cult members could escape. She apologized and asked for their help. The guard readily agreed, intending to take her to a physician at once. She interrupted him firmly. She insisted that medical treatment was secondary, stressing that extremely dangerous enemies were still within the palace, and that the situation had to be reported without delay. At her hurried insistence, one of the guards tried to calm her, acknowledging the seriousness of her claim while assuring her that reinforcements would arrive soon. She rejected that reassurance. With urgency rising in her voice, she apologized and asked them to lift her up instead, insisting that she would guide them personally. The guard questioned why guiding them mattered more than treating her injuries. She pleaded desperately, urging him to trust her and stressing that they were running out of time. After a brief pause, the guard relented. That guard was Hobom, disguised in a Golden Guard's uniform. He lifted her onto his back and began carrying her. From there, she directed him toward the northwest section of the Imperial Palace, urging him to hurry. Behind them, the other guard followed closely, a wanton smile forming on his face. She pressed Hobom to move faster. Hobom warned that the ride would not be pleasant given her injuries and asked whether she would endure it. She dismissed the concern, telling him not to worry over such minor wounds and to hurry. At her insistence, Hobom accelerated sharply. His speed surged to a level incomparable to his earlier pace. The supervising maid felt the sudden increase and was inwardly stunned. She realized just how fast he truly was. She knew that the Golden Guards were trained in martial arts, yet the energy he was releasing felt far beyond the level of a Grand Master. The same held true for the guard following them, who maintained equal speed without difficulty. The realization unsettled her. Each time she indicated a direction, Hobom adjusted instantly and continued without slowing. Before long, they reached the northwest side of the palace. Her breath caught as a massive structure came into view. A colossal tomb-like building loomed before them, far larger than the emperor's own residence. It was the royal shrine of a former emperor. She instructed Hobom to stop. Relief washed over her as she gasped for breath. Hobom could feel her breathing against his ear, and the closeness made him tense. He questioned why they had come to such a place. In response, the supervising maid suddenly reached forward and seized his neck. He choked in shock, demanding to know what she was doing. She declared her authority coldly. As a supervising maid of the Imperial Palace Guardians, she received orders directly from His Majesty. From that moment on, she commanded him to forget everything he had witnessed. If he failed to do so, she would behead him according to royal law, along with the guard behind him. Hobom answered calmly that he understood. Satisfied, the maid released her grip and pointed toward the shrine, instructing them to enter. Hobom hesitated inwardly as he questioned whether she truly meant the shrine itself. She affirmed it without hesitation. With that, they proceeded inside the shrine. As they stepped inside, the supervising court maid felt a surge of unease. Inwardly, she pitied them. They had helped her. Yet because they were not permitted to enter this place, they were meant to be killed the moment they crossed the threshold. As they advanced, Hobom reflected inwardly that this truly was the imperial tomb of the the founding emperor. The question of why they had been brought here gnawed at him. Unable to restrain himself, Hobum let out a quiet exclamation as he took in the interior. The shrine was lavishly adorned in gold, utterly unlike any ordinary sanctuary. A portrait of the first emperor dominated the inner wall, radiating solemn authority. The supervising maid questioned why he was not bowing after witnessing the first emperor. Caught off guard, Hobum stammered, unsure how to respond. Yowon intervened smoothly. He acknowledged that bowing to the founding emperor was only proper, but pointed out that there was no incense prepared, and reminded her that she herself had stressed the urgency of their situation. The maid accepted the reasoning and instructed them to move to the right. To the right of the altar, a massive red cloth embroidered with golden dragons hung prominently. When the maid reached out and pulled it aside, a hidden path leading behind the altar was revealed, yet their way was blocked. A wall of solid sapphire stood in front of them. As Yowon raised the lamp to illuminate it, an engraved image emerged clearly, an animal resembling a Kirin. Kirin were ancient mythical creatures, incarnations of fire said to emit flames from their bodies. Mentioned even in the three classics, they were revered, much like fengguangs, as symbols heralding the appearance of an enlightened ruler. Yowon examined the carving inwardly. A drawing like this hidden behind the founding emperor's altar was intriguing enough, but what unsettled him more was the way it had been carved. The marks resembled those made by bare fingers rather than tools, suggesting that the one who created it possessed immense chi. The supervising maid urged them not to waste time and instructed them to move closer to the wall. As Hobum stepped nearer, the maid pressed both eyes of the carved Kirin at once. The engraved eyes sank inward, and the sapphire wall split apart like the gates of a fortress, revealing a passage beyond. This was the entrance to the secret imperial palace Guardian's Hall. The moment they crossed the threshold, the maid fell silent. Once again, the heavy stench of blood assaulted her senses. Yowon sensed it immediately. Inwardly, he noted that the otherworldly energy emanating from within was far stronger than what he had felt from the supervising court maid. This confirmed that the Imperial Palace Guardian's Hall truly lay ahead. The maid urged them to hurry. Hobum acknowledged her instruction and moved forward without delay. They moved swiftly through the hall. Yowon remarked that he had never known a place like this existed within the Imperial Palace. Given how vast it was, he questioned whether prisons should also be located here and asked if she knew where they were. The supervising maid rejected the question outright, asserting that it was not something a mere guard had the right to ask, and ordering him to simply follow her instructions. As they reached the center, three paths intersected. Under normal circumstances, Guardian Hall guards would be stationed there, spears in hand. Instead, bodies lay scattered across the floor, motionless and lifeless. The maid was struck with shock, unable to comprehend how such a thing was possible. Before she could process it further, voices reached her ears. The guard spoke calmly, remarking that this was unexpected and questioning whether anyone had visited the place before them. The maid froze. The voices were different from before, yet unmistakably familiar. Yowon let the lamp fall to the ground. He declared that there was no longer any need to continue the act. His expression darkened as he questioned her again, demanding to know where the prisons inside the Imperial Palace Guardian's Hall were located. The realization struck her like a blade. She tried desperately to deny what she was experiencing, but there was no mistaking that voice. It belonged to the lord of the demonic cult. She understood then that she had been deceived. The ones who had slaughtered the courtmaids had not fled. They had disguised themselves as guards and infiltrated the Guardian Hall itself. The shock was overwhelming. It was already unforgivable that they had killed her leader and the other courtmaids. Now they had used her and breached the most protected place within the palace. In desperation, she resolved to strike down the man carrying her. The moment she reached out and grabbed Hobum's neck, her own neck snapped. A dull sound echoed as her body went limp. In her final moments, she saw Chun Yowon looking down at her before her consciousness faded into darkness. Her lifeless body slid off Hobum's back and collapsed onto the floor. Yowon calmly asked whether Hobum was alright. Hobum answered that he was. He had believed he had drawn his sword quickly, but the demon lord had acted even faster. Surveying the scene, Hobum questioned what had happened there as he looked at the fallen guards. The blood had not yet clotted, telling him that their deaths were recent, yet something felt deeply wrong. The method of killing was eerily similar to that of the sword demon. Worse still, the corpses bore clear traces of demonic cult energy. There was no way Yowon or any any member of the demonic cult would leave behind such obvious signatures. Yo-Won stated calmly that this would not end with merely rescuing the squad leaders. Meanwhile, within the 6th central room of the Guardian Hall, nearly 50 soldiers in standard uniforms stood gripping their weapons, their gazes fixed tensely on the hall's entrance. At the center of them stood a middle-aged man wearing the formal attire of the Imperial Palace commander. His expression was grim as his hand rested on the hilt of his sword. Just then, rapid footsteps echoed. A soldier burst in from the common entrance of the hall, panic evident as he reported that the wall had opened and that the intruders would arrive at any moment. The commander groaned in frustration, unable to accept how the situation had spiraled into this state. Inwardly, he questioned their true objective. The reason for attacking the central hall was obvious. The palace's greatest treasure, passed down through generations of the imperial family, was safeguarded here under the Guardian's command. That treasure could never be allowed to fall into enemy hands. The commander shouted for the soldiers to brace themselves, ordering them to prepare for impact. He commanded them to stake their lives on stopping the intruders, forbidding them from allowing anyone to pass into the 7th passage, regardless of the cost. As he tried to raise morale, his voice suddenly faltered. From the common aisle, the sound of approaching footsteps grew unmistakably clear. They had arrived. Moments later, 3 figures emerged at the entrance of the hall. The clothing of the 2 men was drenched in blood, while a woman walked between them with her sword lowered. The extent of the bloodstains made it impossible to imagine how many lives they had already taken. The woman muttered to herself with open disdain, remarking on the endless slaughter of insects hiding behind a grave. One of the men dismissed the Guardians as insignificant, stating that they needed to leave soon and ordering the woman to handle the place while they proceeded with their plan. The woman acknowledged his words with a nod and began walking casually through the center of the hall, passing directly among the gathered warriors. Her arrogance ignited the Guardians' fury. Several shouted in outrage, condemning her disrespect in the presence of the Guardians and charging to kill her. 3 soldiers released their internal energy and rushed forward. In the instant they reached her, their bodies split apart and collapsed to the ground. They died without even managing to scream. The sight of their sudden, brutal deaths left the remaining Guardians stunned into silence. None of it made sense to them. Even the commander, tasked with leading them, stood frozen, his mind unable to reconcile what he had just witnessed. The Imperial Palace Guardians Hall, hidden beneath the Great Imperial Tomb, consisted of 7 chambers. The 7th room lay at the deepest level, a place so restricted that even the 2nd and 3rd Supremes were rarely permitted entry. With cold contempt, the woman insulted them as worthless. She stepped forward again, advancing directly toward the master, the one she intended to bring down next. The heat grew increasingly oppressive. A middle-aged man accompanying the woman known as the Bloodblade Master was drenched in sweat. Even with a body honed through cultivation, the heat was far beyond what could be considered normal. He then asked whether she was alright. The Bloodmaster merely smiled, amused that he was struggling under such conditions. Inwardly, the man was shaken. She had not even broken a sweat. As expected of an executive of the Berserk Saber of the 6th martial arts sect, her inner energy existed on an entirely different level. Not long after, the passage finally came to an end. The man concluded that they had reached their destination. Just as they were about to step forward, a white barrier manifested before them. It felt strange to see the passage end so abruptly. Beyond the white wall, there appeared to be no other entrance. As they approached, engraved text came into view on the surface of the wall, marking it as an entrance. The warning declared that anyone who sought the treasures beyond would be trapped for eternity and die miserably, and that those who attempted to escape through force would be crushed to death. The message was vague yet ominous. The Bloodmaster read it calmly and reached out to touch the wall. From a distance, it appeared to be a smooth, pure white surface. Up close, however, she noticed that it was constructed from countless bricks stacked together. A possibility crossed her mind. She stepped forward and entered the wall. An irritated sound escaped her lips as she realized that although the wall was built from individual bricks, they were bound together seamlessly. The man remarked that there had to be something hidden within, and reasoned that it was likely meant to stall for time. The Bloodmaster dismissed it outright. To her, all of it was meaningless. Without giving the warning another thought, she walked straight through the wall, and the middle-aged man followed close behind. Elsewhere, far from the 7th level, the 4th underground opening was in complete ruin. At the bottom of the opening, the traces of a brutal battle were everywhere. Lifeless bodies lay scattered across the ground. Only one person there was still breathing. He complained aloud about how boring it was. Killing them had not taken long, but carving carving patterns into their bodies by carefully manipulating the sword had consumed far too much time. Since only elite warriors were permitted to enter the Guardian's base, there had been no alternative but to proceed in this manner. Even so, he reflected that the task was nearly complete. There were only around 6 bodies left before his work would be finished. He assumed that the Bloodmaster, that monster, had likely already reached the location where the treasure was hidden. He urged himself inwardly to hurry, curiosity about the hidden treasure gnawed at him as well. As he moved quickly toward the next body, he suddenly felt a surge of energy erupting from the common entrance on the opposite side. The timing startled him, and he wondered whether reinforcements could really have arrived so quickly. A startled voice echoed through the space, reacting to the sheer number of corpses scattered across the ground. Hobum, visibly shocked by the scene, spotted a man standing among the bodies. He pointed straight at him and shouted that he had finally found him after descending 4 levels into the basement. The man bristled inwardly at the gesture. Being pointed at by someone beneath him was unacceptable. Suppressing his irritation, he asked calmly whether Hobum was alone. Hobum dismissed the question rudely, showing no concern. The man clicked his tongue, deciding that fear was something Hobum clearly lacked. Boredom flickered through him as he resolved to teach Hobum a lesson. Hobum shrugged indifferently, accepting the challenge. The man charged forward, declaring that he did not know where Hobum's audacity came from, but hoped he would last long enough to make it worthwhile. Exquisite sword chi surged outward and rushed toward Hobum's face. In that instant, a chilling sensation crept in. Before the man could react, sword chi erupted from behind Hobum and pierced straight through the man's chest. The attack was so sudden and precise that he had no chance to block or evade it. Yoan flashed forward like a blaze of light and drove his chi through the man's shoulder. Blood burst from the wound as the man coughed violently. In desperation, he seized the hilt of his sword and swung wildly, managing to deflect Yoan's sword chi just enough to survive. He staggered backward 10 strides to create distance. Staring at Yoan in terror, the man realized inwardly that he had not sensed Yoan's presence at all. He had been completely overpowered in a single exchange. He could not recall anyone like this among the embroidered uniform guards. Though he had narrowly avoided a fatal blow, the damage to his internal organs was severe. He resolved to endure until help arrived. Coughing up blood, he demanded to know who Yoan was. Looking down at him, Yoan answered coldly, questioning how he could fail to recognize the one who had used such methods on the bodies around them. The man failed to understand at first. Then realization struck, and his body went rigid. He understood that this was the lord of the demonic cult. Panic surged as the implication sank in. Without warning, Yoan severed the man's right arm. A scream tore out as he clutched the bleeding stump. Yoan calmly informed him that each wrong answer would cost him another limb. The man's face drained of color as fear overwhelmed him. He realized he was facing a lunatic who would not hesitate to carry out his words. Elsewhere, at the 6th opening, the final line of defense before the deepest underground cavity, a fierce battle raged. Near the entrance leading to the 7th underground opening, the master of the Imperial Palace Guardians lay on the floor with both arms severed. Inwardly, despair consumed him. Each enemy possessed martial prowess equal to or greater than his own. He could not comprehend how such a disaster had befallen the Imperial Palace Guardians Hall. The monstrous woman known as the Bloodmaster had rendered him powerless with a single technique, severing both his arms. He was forced to watch helplessly as his warriors were slaughtered. Tears streamed down his face as he witnessed his companions being killed in the most brutal manner imaginable. More palace guards rushed forward, shouting for one another not to give up and vowing to stop the intruders at all costs. Their resolve changed nothing. The moment they stepped in, their bodies were carved apart without resistance. One of the attackers laughed openly, wondering how many remained. At his words, dread swept through the remaining palace guards. The other intruder smiled faintly and assessed the situation, deciding that there were 5 left and declaring that he would handle them himself. A strange sound followed. Something like debris began to fall from above. A sharp crack echoed as fractures spread across the ceiling, and a warning was shouted for the Spearmaster to move. Massive chunks of stone, as large as boulders, crashed down toward the floor. Startled, the spear wielder reacted just in time, retreating from the collapsing area. He reflected inwardly that he had narrowly avoided a disastrous injury. As the dust slowly settled, the Spearmaster noticed the outline of a figure standing amid the wreckage. He focused his senses, but felt no energy energy at all. The figure seemed no different from an ordinary person with no martial training. Then the figure lightly waved a hand through the air. The dust dispersed instantly, revealing the scene clearly. Chun Yo-won stood there, holding a severed head. It belonged to one of the men assigned to manipulate the sword traces, the Steel Master. Earlier, Yo-won had interrogated him. Yo-won had confirmed whether there were 4 others besides him. The Steel Master had admitted it through coughing, giving up his companion's information in order to die without further suffering. Yo-won had noticed the bulging veins and the unnatural tension in his head, and realized that a parasite was lodged within it. He understood that the man had deliberately revealed the information so he could die before the parasite acted. Yo-won acknowledged it inwardly as a transparent tactic. He had severed the Steel Master's head in a single clean strike. Reflecting on the situation, Yo-won concluded that their infiltration had been for the Kirin blood. He judged that the consequences would be disastrous if that group were allowed to obtain it. He resolved to hurry, but the sheer size of the underground levels made movement painfully slow. That was when a bold idea struck him. He decided to break through the ground. The result was his sudden descent through the ceiling, bringing him directly down to the 6th level. His sudden descent through the ceiling stunned everyone present, not only the infiltrators, but the remaining warriors of the Imperial Palace Guardians as well. Shock rippled through them. Some instinctively believed that reinforcements had arrived, assuming that His Majesty had finally sent help. The Spearmaster, unable to contain his disbelief, was overwhelmed by rage. He could not accept that the Steel Master had been killed by someone he believed to be nothing more than an embroidered uniform guard. Acting on impulse, he rushed forward, driven by fury rather than reason. His companion clenched his teeth in alarm, realizing inwardly that the spearman was acting recklessly. They had no idea of Yo-won's true martial realm, and charging blindly was nothing short of suicide. The Spearmaster unleashed his attack. Blue chi surged violently from his spear, splitting into dozens of overlapping trajectories. The remaining guardians cried out in panic, instinctively warning one another to evade or deflect the attack. The wounded commander, watching from the ground, felt his heart sink. Even at his peak condition, he knew he would not have been able to deflect such an attack head-on. He could not understand what Yo-won intended to do. The Spearmaster himself was convinced of the outcome. Inwardly, he believed the intruder had sealed his own death. The technique he had used was the pinnacle of spearmanship, refined upon the foundation of the Berserk Saber God martial arts. There was no way it could be blocked. Yo-won drew his saber from his waist. In the next instant, a violent series of metallic clashes rang out. The incoming spearheads were abruptly repelled, scattering in all directions as if they had struck an invisible wall. The deflected attacks rebounded toward the Spearmaster himself. Caught off guard, he desperately tried to fend them off. Blood spilled from both of his hands as he struggled to defend against his own attack. In that moment, realization struck him with crushing force. The technique Yo-won had used was unmistakable, the 5th codified form of the Berserk Saber God martial arts. He could not comprehend how someone he believed to be a mere palace guard could possibly know it. Before the thought could settle, his spear cracked and shattered apart. Yo-won moved like a shadow. He closed the distance instantly, his presence blurring as after images trailed behind him. The Spearmaster attempted to retreat, swinging the broken shaft while stepping back to create space, but it was meaningless. Yo-won was already behind him. Black force chi surged violently as Yo-won unleashed the Berserk Saber God's codified form at full precision. The Spearmaster desperately rotated the broken fragments of his weapon, pouring his remaining energy into a final defense. It was not enough. Yo-won pierced straight through him, carving a gaping hole into his chest. Blood burst outward as the Spearmaster collapsed to his knees, disbelief frozen across his face. He could not accept that he had been defeated so completely. Yo-won regarded him calmly, noting that there was no time to linger. He was in too much of a hurry to waste even a moment longer. Cheers erupted as the palace guards watched the infiltrator fall. They celebrated the enemy's death, believing that salvation had finally arrived. Yet the master of the palace guards was left trembling. He could not comprehend it. No one within the embroidered uniform guards possessed martial prowess on this level. Not even their strongest expert came close. The sight filled him with awe and unease. The remaining infiltrator, the Spearmaster's companion, sank into grim contemplation. The Spearmaster had been defeated with only 2 techniques. They had been told that no one among the embroidered uniform guards could rival them. That belief had just been shattered, and the question of Yo-won's true identity weighed heavily on his mind. Yo-won's cold gaze fixed on him, silently pressing the question of whether he was the last one left. Panic seized the infiltrator. He raised his spear, released his energy toward Yowon as a diversion, and turned to flee. Survival was his only thought. If he stayed, he would meet the same fate as the Spearmaster. He resolved to escape and draw Yowon toward the Bloodmaster instead. He sprinted toward the passage's light, only to freeze in shock. The exit was sealed. Dozens of ice swords floated in the air, suspended at the entrance, all aimed directly at him. Confusion and disbelief struck him. He could not fathom how so many ice swords could be controlled at once. Yowon's presence bore down on him, making it clear that escape was never an option. Gritting his teeth, the infiltrator chose desperation over submission. He believed his odds were better forcing his way through the ice swords than facing Yowon directly. Convinced that Yowon would be immobilized while controlling them, he charged forward. He unleashed the Berserk Saber God's fourth codified form, the ultimate destruction of sword. Metallic clashes rang out as the ice swords shattered and rained down like broken hail. Confidence surged through him. They were only ice, nothing that could withstand his ultimate technique. That confidence lasted less than a heartbeat. Yowon was already behind him. A whisper brushed past his senses. Too late to matter. The saber swept through his neck in a single, clean motion. There was no chance to react. His head struck the floor and rolled to a stop. The palace guards gasped in awe. The master of the palace guards, leaning forward despite his injuries, was filled with admiration. The man's identity no longer mattered. What mattered was that he had believed Yowon to be their ally, and that belief gave him hope. With this strength, the monstrous woman below could surely be stopped. Driven by desperation, the master dropped to his knees and begged for Yowon to descend and halt the enemy before the treasure was taken. Yowon approached him in silence. Unease crept into the master's heart as Yowon stopped before him. Fear replaced hope. Yowon asked outwardly what he should do. The master faltered, confused by the question. Yowon made the truth clear. He was not their ally. Before the master could process those words, Yowon slit his throat. Shock rippled through the remaining warriors. The cheers died instantly. The man they had believed to be their savior had killed their commander without hesitation. Yowon stood among them and made it unmistakably clear that there was no misunderstanding left. He declared himself the lord of the 10,000 mountains. Realization dawned too late. The truth was undeniable. This was the demonic cult. Yowon declared that he was now their enemy and that he would kill them all. As the last word settled, the heavenly demon's sword unfolded in his grasp. The hall at the final level of the Guardian base split into 3 paths. While Chun Yowon descended straight down, Hobum had entered through a different route. By turning right at every fork, one would eventually reach the prison cells of the Imperial Palace Guardians. In that place, only one person remained alive. 2 other bodies lay nearby, stripped to nothing but underwear, their forms so battered and disfigured that they were no longer recognizable as human. Hobum cursed under his breath at the sight. These bodies had not merely been tortured. Every fingernail and toenail had been ripped out, and the wounds across their bodies showed clear signs of repeated blows from iron rods. He inwardly lamented that they could not even be taken back with them. Burning the bodies to erase all traces of their existence weighed heavily on him. Sensing his grief, the surviving man asked him to hand over the torch. The man reflected that he had survived only because of an ambush, yet all of them had been prepared to die for the cult from the beginning. As spies, that fate had always been part of their duty. He asked Hobum not to look so burdened, reminding him that they had died fulfilling their roles. Hobum tried to deny his sadness, but the man continued. He reflected that members of the Darkness sect lived as shadows for the cult, without friends or family. The fact that they had spent their final moments under the heavenly demon's rule, and that their bodies were being treated with respect, meant they would have had no regrets. Hobum acknowledged that truth inwardly. He understood it, and so did the demon lord. That understanding was precisely why Yowon's rage ran so deep. Hobum realized it had been a long time since he had seen the demon lord this angry. The thought unsettled him, and he resolved that he needed to finish matters there quickly and hurry to Yowon's side, wondering whether the demon lord was safe after going on alone. At that moment, a violent vibration rippled through the ground as if an underground earthquake had struck. The tremor was not merely physical. An ominous energy surged through the entire area, pressing down heavily. Deeply concerned, Hobum entrusted the remaining work to the master of spies and declared that he would head toward the demon lord immediately. With confirmation given, Hobum rushed out of the prison cells at full speed. Meanwhile, at the deepest 7th level, to reach that place one had to pass through a labyrinth reinforced with energy engines. illusions. Countless traps lay hidden throughout the maze, designed to slaughter intruders. Yet to the Bloodmaster and her companion, it was nothing more than wasted time. With open irritation, the companion reacted as spearheads burst from the floor beneath them, only for the attacks to be effortlessly blocked. In little time, they reached the end of the maze. The exit finally came into view. A sharp exclamation escaped the man assisting her as they stepped forward. The instant they crossed the exit, a violent wave of heat crashed into them. At the far end of the hall lay a vast pond, and at its center rose a protruding rock like a small island. Upon that rock burned an enormous flame, roaring endlessly. Because of the intense heat, steam rose thickly from the surface of the water, resembling a boiling hot spring. At that moment, a voice echoed throughout the chamber, condemning the audacity of those who had dared to step into this place. The man was shaken inwardly. The voice carried a monstrous pressure, yet its source was impossible to pinpoint. The strange energy radiating from the flames distorted everything, preventing him from sensing any presence at all. Unlike him, the Bloodmaster did not search for the source. Her gaze remained fixed on the massive flame as she assumed that the speaker was the final guardian of this place. Her provocation hung in the air. The man felt uneasy, uncertain whether the unseen guardian was male or female, as the voice carried an overwhelming authority. The voice responded again, condemning their arrogance and accusing them of coveting the treasure of the Imperial Palace. The Bloodmaster mocked the unseen guardian, deriding their refusal to show themselves and suggesting that fear, or ugliness, was the reason for hiding. The man wondered inwardly whether such provocation would truly work. Then he saw it. Behind the raging flames, the dark silhouette of a human figure began to move. Shock seized him as the figure stepped forward. Flames clung to its form, wrapping the body entirely. It was as if the being itself was an incarnation of fire. The figure acknowledged that it had initially believed the intruders to be mere guardians. The Bloodmaster immediately assumed that the treasure had already been taken. The figure did not answer. Instead, the flames surrounding its body slowly subsided. As the fire withdrew, a woman was revealed. The red scales that had covered her entire body vanished, replaced by cloth that draped from her chest to her thighs. She was unmistakably beautiful, her figure alluring, with flames still flowing like living embers around her waist. The sight alone was enough to captivate any man. The companion felt his face heat up in embarrassment and instinctively averted his gaze. The woman noticed his reaction and laughed lightly, turning her attention back to the Bloodmaster as she dismissed them as unimpressive. Her words carried open contempt. The Bloodmaster scoffed, inwardly bristling, and dismissed the woman as nothing more than a gravekeeper. That single word hardened the woman's expression. She asserted her role, declaring that she had protected this treasure for a very long time under a promise made to the founding emperor of the Great Ming Empire. She rejected any judgment from thieves who dared to trespass, making it clear that she was not someone they had the right to belittle. The man's eyes widened as he processed the mention of an agreement with the founding emperor. That single fact meant the woman before them had lived for more than 200 years. The Bloodmaster, who had been visibly displeased only moments earlier, now showed a different expression as her eyes sparkled with interest and greed. She inwardly fixated on the possibility that the woman had consumed Kirin blood to attain immortality. The woman cloaked in flames caught that greedy gaze and judged it instantly. Those who entered this place for the treasure were nothing more than fools, and fools were to be exterminated. She identified herself as Guardian Ranyang and declared, according to the ancient agreement, that she would eliminate the thieves who had infiltrated the treasure chamber. A low vibration filled the air as sparks began to rise from her arms, her intent clear, to burn everything before her to ashes. Ranyang grinned and launched herself forward, her killing intent blazing. From her hands erupted an overwhelming inferno that shaped itself into a roaring dragon. The man, terrified by the surging flames racing toward him, instinctively drew his sword and attempted to block the attack. His steel blade formed a dense defensive mesh, but the effort was meaningless. The flames swallowed him instantly. The raging heat invaded the arm holding the sword, forcing him to release it. Yet the fire had already coiled around his body. In a heartbeat, the flames began to burn into his flesh. Agonizing pain tore through him as the fire spread from his arms to his upper body. While he burned, the Bloodmaster moved like a shadow, slipping behind Ranyang. Ranyang perceived the movement immediately and recognized the attempt to strike her throat. She withdrew at the last possible moment, leaping backward to avoid a fatal wound. The Bloodmaster assessed the exchange inwardly, realizing that she had nearly severed Ranyang's throat, but her opponent's reaction speed had saved her by the narrowest margin. Ranyang, in turn, evaluated her enemy. She acknowledged that the woman was fast. Her initial plan to incinerate both intruders had failed, and now she found herself forced onto the defensive. The Bloodmaster acknowledged Ranyang's skill without restraint. Ranyang inwardly noted that it had been 20 years since she had encountered an opponent capable of surviving her ultimate flame. The Bloodmaster made her decision and instructed her companion inwardly to recover and circulate his chi while she handled Ranyang herself. The man complied, sinking into meditation. Internally, he reeled from the encounter. He had nearly been killed by Ranyang's flames and had never imagined encountering another woman who could rival the Bloodmaster in strength. The situation defied his expectations. A low rumbling echoed from above. Something unnatural disturbed the ceiling. Small fragments of rock began to fall, drawing the man's attention upward. Cracks rapidly spread across the stone overhead as if struck by a thunderbolt. The ceiling gave way. Massive chunks of stone collapsed violently. By sheer luck, the man avoided instant death, though his arm was trapped beneath the fallen debris. The sudden collapse drew the attention of both women, who turned their gaze toward the ruined ceiling. Through the settling dust and shattered stone, the outline of a figure became visible, standing calmly atop the rubble. Both women instinctively assessed him, unable to immediately discern his identity. A faint smile formed on his lips as he observed the scene, satisfied that he had arrived in time. Ranyang studied him with sharpened senses. His chi was concealed, yet the pressure he emitted was unmistakably ominous. Even without revealing his power, she could tell that the man disguised as a guard far surpassed the Emperor's personal guards. The Bloodmaster reached the same conclusion. She had believed the battle would end once Ranyang was dealt with, but the situation had taken a dangerous turn. If he had descended from above, then it meant the Blade Master stationed there had already been eliminated. That realization made his identity far clearer and far more troubling. Bloodmaster shifted her gaze between Ranyang and Chun Yo-won. She trusted her own strength, but if both she and Ranyang fought separately, neither would prevail. The same calculation formed in Ranyang's mind. Without exchanging a single word, the two women reached the same decision. They attacked Chun Yo-won simultaneously. Yo-won calmly extended his left hand as the white dragon blade unfolded into form, releasing cold energy. At the same time, the black irons encasing his wrists disassembled, reshaping themselves into the heavenly demon sword in his right hand. The transformation stunned both opponents. A mere guard's arm had turned into a blade, something far beyond common martial principles. The question of who he truly was only deepened their unease. Yo-won moved first. Cold chi surged from his saber toward Ranyang, while dense black force chi from the heavenly demon's sword swept toward the Bloodmaster. Ranyang reacted instinctively, reinforcing her flames, but shock rippled through her as she realized her fire was being neutralized. The Bloodmaster fared no better. She recognized the danger instantly. Yo-won was simultaneously using saber and sword, each with distinct energies and principles. That level of control marked him as an existence she could not underestimate. She resolved to unleash her full strength. Red scales began forming across Ranyang's body as she wrapped both arms in intensified flame chi. The white dragon blade, saturated with cold energy, started to glow red under the extreme heat. The heat transmitted through the blade reached Yo-won's palm, reddening his skin, yet his grip never wavered. Ranyang escalated further, invoking her 12 hellfire. 12 crackling spheres of flame manifested around her and shot upward in unison before detonating violently. Each explosion surpassed her earlier flames by a vast margin. At that exact moment, the Bloodmaster seized the opening. She unleashed the 5th codified form of the Berserk Saber God, the Extreme Art. 24 lethal trajectories of saber energy emerged simultaneously, weaving through the erupting fire without obstruction. All of the attacks converged on Yo-won's position. Explosions thundered through the hall as flame and saber chi collided at a single point. The ground beneath fractured under the overwhelming force, and sparks tore through the air in every direction. The Bloodmaster assessed the destruction and judged the outcome inwardly. The power released should have been sufficient to reduce any opponent to ashes, yet confusion followed immediately. If that man truly belonged to the embroidered uniform guards, why had Ran Yong attacked him without hesitation? Ran Yong reached the same realization at the same time. Both women turned their attention to each other, recognizing the fatal misunderstanding too late. Ran Yong questioned inwardly who the man truly was and whether she should have confirmed his allegiance before striking. Given the scale of the combined attack, she doubted there would even be a corpse left to answer that question. Bloodmaster leveled her saber at Ran Yong and spoke with cold confidence, convinced the battle had already tilted in her favor. In her mind, only one obstacle remained. Ran Yong clicked her tongue, unimpressed. She looked back at Bloodmaster with thinly veiled disdain, her thoughts sharp and cutting. To her, that confidence was laughable. She had only agreed to a joint assault because she judged that Bloodmaster alone lacked the ability to pressure that man properly. Bloodmaster bristled at the implication, her killing intent sharpening. She rejected the idea outright, certain that nothing Ran Yong attempted would work on her. Ran Yong, however, did not retreat. She decided that speculation was pointless, and that the truth would reveal itself once she acted. Before either of them could move, an unnatural sensation crawled across their senses. Both women froze. Something was wrong. Their gazes snapped toward the center of the battlefield, the place where their combined attack had struck. Smoke still billowed thickly from the devastation, but beneath it lurked an eerie presence. From the point of impact, frost spread outward, but it was not ordinary ice. The frozen surface was pitch black. Ran Yong's composure cracked. Her flames still dominated the hall, saturating the space with intense heat, yet the floor itself was freezing. That alone defied all logic tied to her flame arts. Then the smoke parted. Chun Yo-won stood there, unburned to ash, unbroken. Shock struck both women simultaneously. The sight contradicted everything they believed possible. He had clearly taken damage. His armor was fractured, his body marked with cuts and burn wounds. Worse still, his injuries were healing. Before their eyes, scorched flesh knitted together and deep gashes closed at an alarming speed. Ran Yong felt disbelief turn into dread. Even her own regeneration, granted by the consumption of Kirin blood, could not match this pace. The realization rattled her deeply. Yo-won spoke calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. He acknowledged that he had not expected simultaneous attacks from two such high-level opponents, one from the Imperial Palace Guardians and the other from the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. Still, inwardly, he found it inconsequential. What mattered was what came next. He declared that he would no longer fight alone. The words unsettled both women. They focused their senses outward, scanning the area, yet detected no additional presence. There was no reinforcement, no hidden ally. Then Yo-won raised his right hand. Blue light began to gather in the air above it. Bloodmaster's confidence shattered. Her eyes trembled as the light condensed, confirming the fear she had refused to voice. The energy formed into shape, countless blades suspended freely in the air. Ran Yong felt her breath catch. The implications were horrifying. The mystic realm required to manifest such a phenomenon lay beyond conventional mastery. In her centuries of existence, she had never once encountered a martial artist who had reached that stage. Even if he truly stood in that realm, controlling such a number of air swords simultaneously should have been impossible. Bloodmaster forced herself out of stunned disbelief and analyzed the situation with cold urgency. Even the most accomplished blade master in existence could not control more than 7 blades through chi sword manipulation. What stood before her now far exceeded that boundary, and yet she knew this was no moment to freeze in awe. Ran Yong reached her own conclusion just as quickly. No matter how overwhelming Yo-won appeared, there had to be a limit to the amount of chi he could sustain. Bloodmaster was her enemy, but survival outweighed pride. For her own sake, Ran Yong found herself hoping that the other woman would endure long enough to divide Yo-won's attention. Within his mind, Yo-won issued a single command to NANO, signaling that he would fight without restraint. NANO responded instantly. Yo-won then advanced and dared the two women to meet his expectations. The air screamed. The 12 air swords hovering around Yo-won moved as one, splitting cleanly into 2 groups. 6 blades veered toward Ran Yong, while the remaining 6 surged toward Bloodmaster. Ran Yong reacted immediately. The 12 hellfire spheres circling her erupted outward, flames roaring as they collided head-on with the incoming air swords. Yet the impossible happened. The air swords cut straight through the flame spheres. Ran Yong's eyes trembled as fear crept in. The sight shattered her understanding of flame supremacy. In desperation, desperation, she slammed her fist into the ground. The impact fractured the stone beneath her, molten lava bursting upward as a towering pillar of flame surged skyward. She judged that no energy-based sword, no matter how refined, could pierce a flame pillar of that magnitude. The air swords halted and veered away, unable to force their way through the inferno. At that same moment, NANO activated multiple techniques in perfect unison, 3 from the Heavenly Demon Sword art, and 3 from the 24 demonic techniques. The shift in pressure was immediate. Ranyang felt it and could not suppress her shock. The flow of energy changed, layering upon itself in a way that defied conventional martial logic. Still, she refused to yield. Flames erupted violently from both her hands as she countered with everything she had. Her flames and the air swords collided repeatedly, each impact ringing like a bell of death. On the other side of the battlefield, Bloodmaster fared no better. 6 air swords pressed her relentlessly from all directions. She poured everything into her saber techniques, moving with razor precision to avoid fatal strikes, yet each exchange pushed her closer to the brink. Bloodmaster felt her composure cracking as realization struck her with brutal clarity. He was not merely controlling chi swords, he was executing full sword techniques through them. It felt as if she were facing 6 perfected martial artists simultaneously. Each incoming strike was complete, refined, and merciless. Inwardly, panic surged. Every one of those techniques surpassed the Berserk Saber God martial arts in completeness. Yet beneath the terror, a sense of familiarity crawled up her spine. She recognized it. Her mind raced back to an old memory. One of the ancient figures who had once blocked the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect from expanding deeper into the Jianghu. That old man had revealed himself as the founding leader of the demonic cult. The resemblance was undeniable. No, worse than that, this man's techniques were flawless compared to that elder's. The conclusion became unavoidable. This opponent had to belong to the demonic cult. And there was only one man in the present era capable of such swordsmanship. Long hair, pale face, the exact appearance their spies had described again and again. The very existence that had ruined their schemes countless times. Chun Yowon, the lord of the demonic cult. Shock and fury churned together inside her. By all accounts, he should have remained within the demonic cult, occupied with internal suspicions or preparing for the NANO festival. Yet here he stood. Their plans had gone catastrophically wrong, and she could not even warn the sect. Before she could steady her thoughts, a sharp sensation grazed behind her ear. The pond of boiling water was right behind her. Only then did she realize how far the relentless pressure of the 6 air swords had driven her back without her noticing. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ranyang struggling as well. The truth was obvious. At this rate, both of them would be defeated long before Yowon exhausted his inner energy. Desperation sharpened her resolve. Her gaze flicked toward the heart of the chamber. The Kirin blood had to be here. She did not know whether its effects would manifest instantly, but the blood of a mythical beast should amplify chi beyond normal limits. Betting everything on that chance was her only option. Clutching her saber tightly, Bloodmaster slammed it into the ground. She unleashed the 7th codified form of the Berserk Saber God martial arts. In an instant, the blade split into 8 branches, each forming a vivid afterimage. The 8 saber shadows spread outward with overwhelming force, crashing into the advancing air swords and violently forcing them back. For the first time since the battle began, she carved out an opening. Seizing the moment without hesitation, Bloodmaster moved, intent on buying the time she desperately needed. In the same instant her resolve formed, a sharp, chilling sensation tore through her. The cold she had felt a heartbeat earlier revealed its meaning as her right arm was severed cleanly. Still clutching the saber, the limb dropped onto the scorched ground, and agony ripped through her consciousness. Yowon stood before her. He had already closed the distance, making it clear that he had no intention of allowing her plans to proceed. Bloodmaster forced herself to seal her blood points to slow the bleeding. Panic and disbelief churned inwardly as she realized that his speed and precision had surpassed what she believed possible for a human. Yet even then, obsession overrode fear. For the sake of the sect's grand cause, she convinced herself that he had to possess a weakness, some opening she could exploit once his guard dropped. That hope died instantly. A second flash of cold struck, and her other arm was cut away just as effortlessly. Her scream echoed through the chamber as her last means of resistance fell to the ground. Yowon showed no hesitation, no pity. He made it unmistakably clear that she had been warned. Desperation twisted her thoughts. Pale-faced and gasping, she tried to provoke him, clinging to ridicule as her final weapon. Yowon's response was merciless in its clarity. To him, anyone who wielded a weapon and chose violence forfeited such excuses. Her attempt to redefine herself in desperation held no meaning. Her composure shattered completely. Rage consumed what little restraint remained, and she threw herself into blind hatred, forgetting her ruined body entirely. That was the end. The 6 air swords that had surrounded her moved at once. They pierced her body from every direction, leaving no space for escape, no room for survival. Her life was extinguished in an instant, and her mutilated form fell backward into the pond that had been boiling moments before. As her body sank beneath the surface, Yoan noticed something strange. The water no longer bubbled. The pond, despite the massive flame burning at its center, remained full. It continued to boil without evaporating, defying natural law. Her death had granted him a clearer view of the anomaly at the heart of the chamber. Nano's calm assessment echoed within Yoan's mind, informing him that a little over a third of his internal energy still remained. He had not been fighting for long, yet even after reaching the mystic realm, unleashing attacks of this magnitude placed a heavy burden on him. Power at this level was overwhelming, but it was not limitless. Only one opponent remained. Ranyong, the guardian whose body burned with living flames, was still standing. She struggled beneath the relentless pressure of the air swords controlled by Nano, yet she endured far better than the Bloodmaster ever had. Sword chi saturated the hall. With every passing moment, the space around her grew more suffocating. Defending against the converging blades became increasingly difficult. One misstep was all it took. A blue-hued trajectory sliced across her ribs, forcing her body to stagger. That instant of imbalance invited another strike, and a blade tore through the side of her left thigh. Yoan's gaze sharpened. The wounds were closing, not instantly, and nowhere near as rapidly as his own regeneration under Nano's support, but unmistakably so. That was how she had endured until now, but endurance alone would not change the outcome. Yoan resolved to end it. There was no reason to delay any longer, not after the Bloodmaster's death. As he raised his hand to conclude the battle, a sudden disturbance tore through his focus. A familiar presence cried out in pain. Yoan's eyes shifted toward the entrance. At the far end of the hall, Hobum had been seized. A man in a pitiful state, his arm crushed beyond recognition, had dragged him close and pressed a dagger against his throat. Desperation twisted the man's expression, his survival instinct overriding all reason. Hobum stiffened, humiliation burning beneath his panic. The cold steel biting into his skin made even breathing dangerous. Before the man could tighten his grip any further, Yoan moved. The man barely sensed a change in the air before Yoan was already in front of him. Terror surged through his veins. Instinct screamed at him to retreat, and he leapt backward, tearing himself away and scrambling to escape. Only then did he truly understand. The speed before him was beyond comprehension. With stone-cold eyes fixed on the man, Yoan demanded that he release Hobum, exerting overwhelming pressure. The man's resolve wavered, yet desperation forced him to threaten Hobum's life, convinced that killing the hostage was his only leverage. As Yoan's aura continued to swell, fear gnawed deeper into the man's mind, pushing him toward reckless decisions. Cornered, the man attempted to bargain for survival, proposing that Yoan hand over the blood of Kirin and guarantee his escape in exchange for Hobum's life. Yoan responded with chilling calm. He offered a choice: release Hobum and receive a swift, painless death, or refuse and suffer a death so agonizing that the man would regret ever being born. The realization struck the man instantly. There was no path to survival. Panic flooded him. Hobum, understanding that he was becoming a liability, clenched his teeth and resolved not to burden his lord any further. He gathered his chi and tried to strike his captor himself. The man sensed the surge of energy at once. Startled and acting purely on instinct, he slashed. The blade cut across Hobum's neck, and Hobum collapsed forward, blood spilling as his body fell. Yoan's restraint shattered. Rage erupted as he surged forward, crossing the distance in an instant. The captor's eyes widened in horror, barely registering Yoan's movement before reacting. It was already too late. The white dragon blade streaked through the air like lightning, severing the arm that held the dagger. The man screamed as the limb fell away. Yoan advanced without mercy, his killing intent laid bare. This was only the beginning, and the man would not be granted an easy death. Yowen's blade carved through the air in savage arcs, slicing into the man from every direction. Flesh was torn apart as Yowen stabbed him repeatedly, each strike fueled by cold fury rather than technique. When the body finally failed to resist, Yowen discarded his blade and seized the man's head with his bare hands. He reminded him of the warning he had given, his intent overflowing without restraint. The energy pouring from Yowen's hands became overwhelming. A scream tore out as Yowen's fingers pierced straight through the man's skull. At that moment, Nano's voice echoed inside his mind, informing him that only 15% of his energy remained and that chi sword control could no longer be sustained. As Nano's assessment finished, the air swords froze mid-air and began to dissipate one after another. With the pressure gone, Ran Yang, who had been fending off 6 air swords, finally gained breathing room and immediately closed the distance toward Yowen without hesitation. Yowen sensed the danger instantly. He wanted to prolong the suffering, but the presence rushing in from behind was too fast to ignore. Still gripping his fingers inside the man's skull, Yowen caught hold of the body by the shoulders. The man screamed in terror as Yowen flexed his muscles. Bones cracked, and with a brutal twist, Yowen tore the head cleanly from the body. The scream ended only after the separation was complete. He flung the severed head onto the floor without a second glance and immediately reached toward the ground. The white dragon blade shot back into his hand in a sharp blur. Yowen spun on his heel and hurled the blade toward Ran Yang as she rushed at him. Then, she collapsed. Ran Yang dropped to her knees abruptly, the impact echoing through the hall. Yowen narrowed his eyes, wary of deception, but she kept her head lowered and shouted with such force that her voice reverberated off every wall. She proclaimed that the one she had long awaited had finally appeared, the lord of the demonic cult, the heavenly demon. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.